The prince points his finger and yells that he's breaking off their engagement, right in front of everyone. The girl just stands there in her fancy dress, looking completely stunned by the sudden call-out. Behind the prince, a whole group of serious-looking guys stands ready, making the whole scene feel even more intense. She looks down, feeling completely over it, and thinks about how annoying this whole thing is. The girl realizes this is the ultimate cliché, like she's living through a reverse harem ending from a game. Looking at the crowd, she wonders what it's even like for a group of guys to be that obsessed with one girl. Turns out, she's not from this world. She actually has all these memories of her past life. She thinks back to being raised in a totally normal family in Japan, just an average girl going to school. After finishing college, she got a job as a local civil servant and lived a pretty quiet life that in her spare time. She was always glued to her phone, totally hooked on playing autumn games. But then, out of nowhere, her life just suddenly came to an end, and the next time she opened her eyes, she'd been reborn as the oldest daughter of a marquis in the Yule Kingdom. She looks around as a baby, wondering if this is that ice guy reincarnation thing people talk about, considering she wasn't some overworked corporate slave and didn't really have any beef with society, even though she died pretty young. She figures she didn't have enough stuff holding her back to keep her old memories, but then again she decides she might as well just enjoy the ride. At first, she doesn't think much of it whenever she catches her reflection in the mirror, but by the time she turns 10, she gets hit with this crazy sense of déjà vu. The whole thing goes down at the royal palace during the prince's birthday party, where the young prince just stands there looking totally surprised while everyone watches. Diana stands there with her eyes wide open. She's completely frozen, and starts wondering why this whole scene feels so familiar, just as the boys in front of her try to start a formal introduction. The boy standing right there is the first prince of the realm, and his full name is Lord Saphiro Yule, a name that immediately rings a bell for her. She repeats the name Saphiro to herself, feeling totally confused until she realizes she actually knows both his name and her own name from her past life, that it's not just the prince either. She recognizes the kids standing on both sides of him, and even her own brother looks familiar. Right at that second, everything comes rushing back, and she remembers exactly where she is. She's actually the villainess of an autumn game, and it gets even worse, because she knows she's destined to be publicly called out and ruined at her academy graduation party. Diana is looking totally drained as she realizes she's headed for a massive public downfall. It's basically guaranteed that she'll be judged and sent away for good. Looking back, everything in her life followed the game's script perfectly, and even though she spent years by the prince's side, it all felt like a movie she'd already seen. She became Saphiro's fiancée early on, and had to deal with brutal training from the queen before finally starting at the academy. That's when things really went south, because the main heroine finally showed up. She was just a baron's daughter, but she and the prince started falling for each other immediately. Plus, all the guys in the prince's inner circle were totally obsessed with her too. Diana thinks the whole "everyone loves the commoner" thing is such a cliché, and she actually tried to call off the engagement a bunch of times just to save herself the headache. But it didn't matter what she did, because she kept getting blamed for bullying the girl. Even now, she can hear people whispering about her being the villain who pushed the heroine down, which makes her realize that the game's plot is basically a force of nature. It's like the world is literally forcing these events to happen, so no matter how hard she tried to change things, she was always going to end up standing here getting dumped in front of everyone. Prince Saphiro snaps at Diana, asking if she's even listening to him right now, as the whole room looks at her like she's just some crazy, jealous noble girl, and everyone assumes she's just bitter about the prince being stolen from her. Diana realizes she completely tuned him out while she was lost in thought, but Saphiro says he'll repeat himself as many times as it takes for her to get it. He tells her that the way she acted at the academy was totally unacceptable, and since she's so cold-hearted, he thinks just breaking the engagement is too easy that he decides to banish her and commands her to never call herself the daughter of a marquis ever again, while Diana just looks on, thinking about how she didn't even do any of the things he's accusing her of. He says she's being stripped of her rank and sent to a brothel, but just then someone nearby calls out to her. Diana's brother looks her right in the eye and says the whole situation is just sad, that he tells her he can't believe his own sister would actually do the things she's accused of, and it's honestly embarrassing for him to even be part of the same noble family right now. He keeps going, saying Diana just stares at him, her own little brother, while he talks down to her like this. He explains that the prince was actually nice enough to let their family off the hook, but there's a catch that he says the deal is that Diana has to be the only one to step down and throw away her title as a noble. Diana watches him, thinking it's pretty bold of him to keep saying our house, when he isn't even the legitimate heir to the family name. She realizes the only reason he's even putting on this big show and holding a party today is because the actual head of the house and their oldest brother aren't home to keep him in check, that it's a huge change from how things used to be back then. He totally adored her and always called her his big sister. But everything flipped once he started at the academy, and Diana figures she can't even be that mad. Since he's a capture target in this game world, the plot is basically just forcing him to be a jerk to her. Diana notices that just like she thought, the king, the queen, and the prime minister are nowhere to be seen, and it turns out the knight commander and the duke aren't here either. Basically, everyone with real power is missing, so she realizes this whole public shaming was perfectly planned from the start to make sure nobody could stop it. Even though she knows it's a setup, Diana looks them all in the eye and swears to God she never bullied that girl. She tells the crowd that if this is really what they all want, she'll just accept it and step down. But inside she's thinking about how this is the most forced, scripted ending she's ever seen in her life. The prince looks pretty surprised when Diana asks him if the paperwork for her leaving is already finished. She tells everyone right then and there that she's leaving immediately, which leaves her brother and the others totally stunned. Before she goes, Diana gives a polite bow and apologizes for ruining their big graduation party with all this drama. She starts walking out of the room, ignoring the people calling out her name as she finally makes her exit. Diana doesn't even look back as she says her final goodbye to the prince, and she thinks about how those 7 long years being stuck as his fiancée were more than enough. She admits to herself she never loved the guy for a second, so she figures Jane can have him, and later on, the carriage finally stops and someone tells Diana they've arrived at their destination. She steps out and takes a look at the house where she'll be staying from now on, but as she walks toward the entrance, she can't help but think this whole exile treatment is actually kind of wild. A guy reaches out and asks for her hand to help her along, and Diana starts to thank him, but notices how sad he looks, that he's clearly not happy about any of this. It turns out this guy is Bart, the prince's own attendant, and he actually came all this way just to see her off safely. Diana looks around the new place and thinks that for an exile spot, it actually doesn't look shady at all. Diana turns back to Bart and mentions that this whole situation must be pretty rough on him too, but Bart just says her name as she guesses he was only ordered to drop her off and bring back the signed papers. She tells him that since all the legal stuff is finally over, it means that from this point forward this house is where she'll be staying, and Diana just smiles and says she's well aware of that. Bart looks like he's about to lose it and calls out to her again, clearly taking this harder than she is. Diana notices his expression and asks if he's actually worried about her. She seems almost amused by it. She goes on to say she's really glad he was the one who got to see her off today, and thanks him for the last 7 years while Bart just stands there, totally unable to find the right words to say back. Diana tells him to make sure he keeps supporting the prince and that commoner girl from now on, and she gives him a final genuine smile and tells him to make sure he takes care of himself. Bart heads out into the night, leaving the estate behind now that his task is finished, and Diana's whole vibe changes instantly. She tells herself that if anyone expected her to spend her exile crying and groaning, they've got her all wrong. Standing tall as the new owner of the property, she takes a second to look over the paperwork and tells herself she did a good job. She admits that when she first heard about the exile, she thought it was just a joke, but it turns out the whole thing was actually pretty obvious. She smiles to herself, realizing the people working against her are playing for keeps. She's honestly a bit surprised they went through with kicking her out so late at night. She starts thinking back to the word enemy and remembers how it all started back on that day. She flashes back to seeing the prince protecting that other girl, and even back then she knew the engagement was doomed. That was the only conclusion that made sense to her, so she accepted the reality of the situation. The truth is, Diana had been trying to avoid getting stuck with that engagement from the very beginning. Diana looks at the prince, thinking about how he needs a woman who actually fits the royal role, and she admits she spent all that time coming up with plans to break off the engagement. But it turns out even with her memories from her past life, she still couldn't change the way things were headed. Thinking about how things get messy at the end of the story makes her lose it, and she just sits there clutching her head, but a new thought suddenly hits her. Her eyes go wide as she realizes something big, and she wonders if she can actually change what happens after this whole public condemnation scene is over. She tells herself that while the graduation party is supposed to be the end of the story, that's only how things go down in the game. For people like her, the ones who are actually living their real lives in this world, things don't just stop there, and she realizes that graduation was never really the goal to begin with. From there, things take a bit of a turn as Diana starts looking pretty stressed out while Bart just watches her, but then we see her at a shop. The guy behind the counter asks if she's sure about selling her stuff, and she says it's fine since she's been secretly saving up cash for a specific reason. It turns out she actually bought a high-class brothel with that money, and she's just sitting there like it's no big deal, and that's when one of the staff calls her the owner. Diana looks back holding some papers, and the woman offers to show her to her room. Diana just gives this confident smirk because she basically took the place she was banished to and turned it into her own personal business, and she feels pretty good about being able to renovate the whole building. It was all possible thanks to her past life. Honestly, it's probably the only time those old memories have actually been useful so far. She starts getting into the weeds with the construction, telling the workers the trunks need to look cleaner and pointing out other spots to fix. She's really using every bit of her old knowledge to make the best of a bad situation. Even though she got sent to a brothel, she's not letting it get her down. Diana can't help but smile to herself. She really did manage to just move into her own shop, and now she's planning on just spending her time relaxing for once. But then the staff woman brings up the servant from before, and Diana is a bit surprised to hear Bart's name mentioned. The woman points out that even though he's the prince's attendant, he seemed really worried about Diana. Bart looked pretty serious back then, just agreeing with whatever was needed to keep her safe. The woman is actually kind of shocked that he's nothing more than an acquaintance to Diana. Diana just keeps it cool and says he really was a good person to have around, mostly because he always took such good care of her whenever the prince wasn't nearby. Anyway, time starts moving on, and we see the outside of the big building she's staying in, and it turns out a whole week has passed since she took over the place, that a whole week has gone by without any drama since that public mess with the prince, and Diana is just sitting back, resting her hand on the table while she relaxes. She looks out the window, remembering that her father and her brothers are due back in 3 days, reaching out to grab a small piece of chocolate while she thinks about how things might get messy. She holds the treat up, really wondering what's going to happen once everyone shows back up. Suddenly, a voice breaks her focus, asking if she has a moment to talk, so Diana stands up right away and tells them she's doing just fine. Sedona walks into the room, politely excusing herself for the interruption. Diana turns to her and asks Sedona if something happened or if there's a problem with the shop, but Sedona is basically the one person who keeps the whole place from falling apart. Diana realizes she has absolutely no experience running a business, so Sedona is the one who really steps up and shows off her management skills. Even though Diana is technically the owner of the shop, she knows Sedona is the real manager. Diana even jokes about how she'd honestly rather just be a regular clerk. Sedona catches Diana looking at her with total admiration and asks why her eyes are so sparkly, but Diana brushes it off and asks why Sedona came by, figuring something must be up for her to leave the floor. Sedona looks pretty serious and admits there's a customer being a real pain. She explains that this guy showed up making demands and specifically said he wanted to meet the lady Diana, who had visited the shop a few days ago, that Diana's mood shifts instantly, and she asks Sedona to describe exactly what the guy looked like. Even though the prince himself hasn't actually shown up to the shop, it's already becoming public knowledge that she's involved in this business. Sedona describes the guy as having dark blue hair and glasses and looking pretty handsome, so Diana stops for a second and tries to place the description. The dark blue hair and glasses are a dead giveaway that this guy is one of the prince's main cronies. Sedona mentions that the guy didn't even try to hide who he was and just casually introduced himself. She tells Diana that the man's name is apparently Lord Alexis Lazulite, and Diana just smirks, knowing for sure that's exactly who she thought it was. Alexis Lazulite is a major player in this world. He's the legitimate son of a really famous marquis family and a top-tier noble. Alexis Lazulite isn't just some random guy. He's the prime minister's son and a top aide to the prince, making him a major capture target from the game, and just thinking about it gives Diana a huge headache. Sedona stands there waiting while Diana calls her name to hear the rest of the story. So Sedona starts explaining exactly what she said to the guy when he showed up, telling him that the person he was looking for, Diana Ames, isn't around anymore. She even made up a lie about Diana being bought by some noble from another country. But Sedona looks a little worried now and asks if it was actually okay to just turn him away. She mentions the guy went totally pale the second he heard the news, which makes Diana stop and think for a second. Diana admits she only brushed him off because she assumed he was there to harass her, seeing him as just another one of the prince's annoying followers. But now she's wondering if she was being way too cautious. Sedona keeps talking about the visit, mentioning the guy looked completely miserable as he dragged himself away. She looks at Diana and asks if she honestly doesn't have a single clue why he'd be that upset. Diana stares out the window and admits she wasn't really looking at him. All she noticed was his hair color and those glasses. So she adds that she did think he looked pretty smart, though Sedona just sighs and addresses her as the shop owner. Sedona reminds her that the lie is already out there. The guy thinks she was bought by a noble and is long gone, meaning Diana is pretty sure he won't be coming back to bother them ever again. Besides, she finally has her freedom back, and she isn't about to let anything ruin that, especially since she knows she can't reveal who she really is this early on. She offers a quick apology to Lord Alexis in her head, telling him they'll meet again someday. But right now, their social lives are just on two totally different levels. Diana thinks to herself that she really doubts a day like that will ever happen again. Standing outside the house, she looks pretty bummed out and says things are just no good, mostly because she had a huge realization when she woke up this morning. She finally noticed that she's definitely put on some weight recently. She thinks back to how it was before she got kicked out. She was always stuck doing queen training or going to parties, so she used to spend every single day being way too busy with royal stuff. But ever since she moved here, she's been taking it pretty easy and just relaxing, though she knows that even with all this freedom, living a totally lazy lifestyle is a bad idea. So she makes a big decision to go for a walk and start a diet. She puts on her glasses and a hat to head out, ready to get moving. Diana walks through the morning market and thinks to herself that this was a great idea because she's having so much fun, but she ends up bumping right into a guy and quickly apologizes, telling him she wasn't looking where she was going. The guy is actually really polite about it and says it's his fault instead because he was just lost in his own head. The two of them stop and actually look at each other, and the guy seems to notice something familiar about her face, that he looks completely caught off guard, and asks her if she is actually Lady Ames. Diana is just as shocked and recognizes him too, asking if he is Lord Lazarite. Flashback to the day before, where Alexis is standing outside a building looking pretty disappointed that someone isn't there, that he looks pretty skeptical, and asks if they're seriously telling him that she's already gone. A voice from the shop confirms that the woman he is looking for actually stopped by about a week ago, and Sedona steps up and tells him that she's the owner, so she was the one who personally took care of the lady's visit. Alexis is losing his cool and demands to know why she isn't there if she was just seen, but Sedona just stands there staring him down without saying a single word. The silence is getting awkward. She looks him over and thinks to herself that things were supposed to go a certain way. Sedona starts by telling him that she's not really allowed to talk about her customers' private info. However, she admits that he clearly has some pretty serious reasons for wanting to find her. Alexis is sweating bullets when Sedona finally tells him that Diana's contract was actually bought out recently. He can't believe what he's hearing and asks for confirmation that someone actually bought her out. Sedona explains the situation, saying that Diana caught the eye of a foreign nobleman who was visiting, and since that happened just yesterday, her current location is a total mystery. Alexis clenches his fist while he stands there looking completely wrecked, wondering why and how things managed to get this bad. Alexis thinks back to when the prince publicly called out Diana at the graduation party and how she ended up getting banished to a brothel after everything went south, that he remembers the very first time they met. It was during the prince's 10th birthday celebration. The whole event was basically just a party in name only because in reality, it was actually a formal meet-and-greet for the prince's future aides and his possible fiancé candidates. Since Alexis was being raised as the prince's close childhood friend, he was right there at the prince's side for the event just like he always was. While all the other young noble girls in their fancy dresses were squealing with excitement and crowding around, Diana was the only one who just stood there looking completely frozen, the young Diana Amethyst, daughter of the powerful Marquis Amethyst. Among all the noble girls there, Diana really stood out with her silver hair and those big eyes. She just had this look that completely set her apart from everyone else in the room. Since she had the family name and the looks to back it up, she immediately caught the attention of the king and queen, and before anyone even knew what was happening, she was officially named the prince's fiancée. Because Alexis was the prince's right-hand man, he ended up talking to her quite a bit back then, and he noticed she never acted stuck up or bragged about her new status. The thing that really stuck with him was how blunt she was when she talked, but if someone were to honestly ask him what he really thought about her, he'd have to admit that she always seemed like she didn't care about him at all. It was a huge change of pace compared to all the other girls who were constantly trying to get on his good side, just to get closer to the prince. Looking back, Alexis remembers how Diana never put on an act. She was always just her real self, and he watches her walk down the hall with that same calm vibe she always had. Because she acted so normal around him, he couldn't help but laugh a little at how much it affected him. He keeps reminding himself of the reality of the situation, knowing deep down that she is officially the prince's fiancée, and that isn't going to change. He tells himself he can't let any personal feelings get in the way of that, especially since he has a very specific role to play as the prince's right-hand man. His whole life was already planned out. He was supposed to follow his dad's lead and work toward becoming the next prime minister. At least that's what he thought was going to happen. But right after they started at the academy, everything shifted because he found out the prince was totally obsessed with some random girl from a lower noble family. Alexis looks back at how he tried to warn the prince multiple times, but since the guy kept insisting they were just friends, Alexis felt like he couldn't really do anything. But as he watched the prince's attitude toward Diana shift completely, it wasn't long before the whole school was buzzing with rumors about how things were falling apart between them. While Diana stood alone, all of the prince's other aides suddenly started taking the baron's daughter's side. They all started talking down about Diana, and it didn't take long until everything crashed down during that public scene. Alexis stands there beating himself up, wondering if he was just too late to fix things. He grips his fist tight, questioning if the whole mess happened because he failed to talk some sense into the prince and the others Diana's memory. He remembers shouting at the prince, demanding to know why he was actually calling off the engagement. He couldn't understand why the prince felt the need to humiliate her in front of everyone like that. But the prince just brushed him off, saying Diana's actions were way out of line and that a public call-out was the only way to make it count. Alexis looks like he's about to lose it, sweating as he yells out for the prince to listen, that he can't wrap his head around why Diana would ever cause a scene at a party like that. And it makes no sense to him because he knows there is no way she'd ever bully someone out of jealousy. He's certain of it mostly because back when they were still at school together, he remembers seeing her and the prince hanging out by the trees, just laughing and acting normal. But even back then, Alexis noticed something off. She didn't seem to have feelings for anyone, not even the prince. That he realized the truth while watching her. She didn't have a mean bone in her body because she just had zero attachments to anything. He remembers the way she looked in that moment, her face going completely blank like she wasn't even there, but then she just gave a little laugh and reached out, gently placing her hand on his cheek. She looked right at him with this soft smile, telling him it must be really tough for him too. Alexis is stuck in his head thinking about how the prince is the main romantic choice, but there might be a different kind of ending. He remembers Diana telling him to cheer up about a reverse harem ending, but he never actually understood what that meant. He looks back on that day with the prince, realizing he didn't do enough to step in or stop what was happening, and honestly, it was because he had his own reasons for letting things play out the way they did. The truth is, a part of him actually wanted Diana to stop belonging to the prince. He stares at her now, finally admitting to himself that he wanted her for himself, but he never could have guessed she'd lose her noble status and end up getting kicked out to a place like this. Suddenly, Sidona's voice breaks his train of thought as she asks if he's okay, pointing out that he looks pretty rough. She quickly apologizes for speaking up, but Alexis is just completely drained. He apologizes for making a scene and excuses himself, feeling defeated because he came all this way to save her, but things didn't go how he planned. Alexis is stuck in his feelings, realizing he simply didn't make it in time and there's nothing else to say. But then he looks right at her and asks if she's really the lady he used to know. Diana is completely caught off guard, barely able to get the name aims out as she stares at him. She starts panicking because her cover was blown in a second. She really thought this disguise was foolproof, so now she's just super annoyed with herself, wishing she could go back a few minutes and fix everything. She tries to keep her cool, closing her eyes while telling Lord Lazulite that right now she's just Diana. Alexis takes a second to process that, and then simply says he wants to call her Diana, but he also wants her to call him Alexis. She immediately freaks out, saying there's no way she'd ever dare to be that casual, but Alexis just gives her this nice smile and tells her to just call him Alec instead. Diana is losing it internally because he's just making the situation way harder than it needs to be. She even starts wondering if he's going to have her killed, or something if she doesn't listen to him. Diana is still trying to figure out what Alec's actual angle is, but she realizes she just has to suck it up and deal with whatever he's planning. She looks right at him and says she understands, making it official. Diana tells him she'll start calling him Lord Alec, but then she gets an idea and says since they're doing this, she wants him to start calling her D as well. She plays it off with a bit of a laugh, asking if she just totally overstepped her place. She points out that a commoner shouldn't be so casual with a lord, but Alec immediately tells her no. He insists, and asks her to please let him call her D. Diana is caught off guard by how serious he is, only for her to give him a little smile and tell Lord Alec that he's actually being way too kind. Alec mentions he heard she got pretty shaken up and ran off before, but looking at her now, he says her complexion is great and her cheeks even look a bit rosy. Diana starts stressing out because standing in the street like this might give away her noble past, so Alec scans the area and asks if she's actually out here all on her own. She tells him she's just taking a walk, which makes him wonder if she's really wandering the city solo. Diana just laughs it off, saying a regular commoner doesn't need people following her around. But then she turns it back on him, asking why a lord like him doesn't have any guards or help. Alec gets a bit quiet and admits she's right, but then he shifts the mood to talk about yesterday, calling out her name as Diana realizes things are about to get a lot more serious. She looks completely caught off guard when Alec says there's something he really needs to ask her. Alec looks around and tells Diana they can't really talk about this in such a crowded area, so he starts looking for a better spot, then suddenly remembers a place that might work that he reaches out and grabs her hand, asking if there was a nice cafe somewhere in this town, and before she can even react, he starts pulling her along, saying they should talk over there. Diana gets all flustered and tries to say something, but Alec is already in a great mood. He just smiles and tells her the cafe they're heading to is actually famous for its cakes, that he tells her it's time to go, leaving Diana standing there with her head spinning because she can't believe he's being so bold. As he leads her through the street, Diana starts thinking that Alec might actually be the chatty type when he's not around others, which is weird because she remembers him being way more of a quiet guy in the original game. Diana realizes that the games she played and her current reality are two different things, especially since a fancy strawberry cake is sitting right in front of her looking delicious. She takes a bite and looks completely happy, totally forgetting her stress for a second as she realizes how weird this is. She originally went out to stick to her diet, but now she is sitting here with Alec. He looks a bit guilty and apologizes for forcing her to come along, so Diana tries to play it cool while holding her tea, telling him it's fine and trying to move the conversation forward. Alec looks her in the eye and asks what it was she actually wanted to ask him earlier, which makes Diana admit that when he was hanging out with the prince, she just thought of him as the guy with the glasses. But she thinks to herself that he's actually way more expressive than she thought. It hits her that even in a game world, the people around her are still real living human beings with their own failings. Diana sips her tea and realizes that with everything happening, she's been way too stuck in a game mentality lately. Alec watches her and mentions how, just like their talk from earlier, he's really impressed by this side of her. He gets a bit more serious and starts to tell her about something that happened just yesterday apparently. Alec heard a rumor that she had been bought out by some foreign nobleman. Diana just freezes, and he explains that he actually went to the place she was sent and heard the whole story from the woman in charge. Diana starts sweating and tries to play it off while looking for a way to explain herself. Alec looks at her and says it's pretty clear now that the story he heard isn't actually true, mostly because here she is, just walking around town freely by herself. Diana starts to panic as he asks if she was even sent to that place to begin with, so she quickly jumps in and tells him that she definitely was sent there. Diana starts stumbling over her words, trying to explain how she's been living there ever since she got sent away, but Alec just cuts in with a really intense smile, calling her by a nickname and asking if she's okay. The pressure is way too much, So Diana starts panicking and apologizing immediately because facing that kind of forceful smile makes it impossible for her to keep her story straight, that it's not long before she just gives up and ends up spilling everything to him. Alec looks genuinely surprised when he hears about the buyout involving her brother, and especially about how she somehow knew exactly which place she would be sent to beforehand. He starts asking a ton of follow-up questions, but Diana just smiles and dodges them all, though she can't help but wonder if Alec is actually an ally or an enemy in all this. As she sips her tea, she figures that he probably isn't here on the prince's orders, which changes things. Diana sips her tea, thinking about how in the original game's harem ending, she and Alec barely even spoke. But things are totally different this time around, since she's currently living in a timeline that's moved way past the actual ending of the story. Looking at her own reflection in the cup, she realizes that since she's in uncharted territory, even she has no idea what's going to happen next. She gets a bit tense because she really doesn't want to mess things up now, especially since she managed to successfully dodge her public condemnation earlier. But looking back, she realizes she was pretty careless when she rushed outside that night, and that's exactly how she ended up bumping into the prince's aide, who also happens to be her boss. Standing outside the shop, Sedona sighs and admits that she didn't exactly think things through either, but she still wants to know how all that drama led to the two of them walking around town together. Diana just hangs her head in her hands, telling her it's better not to ask. A few hours earlier, Diana was just relieved to be free, not realizing that Alec was right there watching her. Alec looks right at her and lets her know he's actually sticking around town for the night. Diana acts surprised and asks if that's really the plan. Alec just gives her this little smile, then catches her off guard by asking if she'd like to go for a stroll with him tomorrow. Diana starts panicking, trying to explain that a big-shot noble like him shouldn't be seen with a commoner like her. But Alec gets this serious look on his face and asks if he's just being a bother to her. She can't really say no to that, so she gives in and tells him she'll join him after all. The whole situation is blowing her mind because they literally haven't even had tea alone together until today. Yet here she is, face down and totally exhausted, wondering how her life turned into such a mess so fast. She decides he must have an ulterior motive and yells that he's only doing this to keep an eye on her, convinced that his real goal is to watch her every move and report back to the prince. Sedona can't help but laugh at Diana, asking if she's actually only 17. She thinks Diana is totally clueless when it comes to guys. Sedona points out the time and mentions she's got to get back to work. Diana knows she's right, so she just nods along. Left alone with her thoughts, Diana realizes she needs to get it together and really think about what's coming. She can't let herself stay this rattled, especially since her dad and the rest of the family are coming back the day after tomorrow. Outside, the night is quiet and the stars are out over the balcony. Everything seems calm for now. Sedona checks the clock and sees how late it's getting, telling Diana she really needs to head out and get to work. Diana agrees that it's time to call it a night, so she watches as Sedona starts to pack it in. Sedona says her goodbyes and walks down the hallway, leaving Diana to deal with her own stress. A quick memory of a fancy couple flashes by, looking like a scene from a party Diana used to know, and as Sedona heads for the door, someone reaches out for the handle to finally step outside. Sedona is just about to head out when a guy's voice stops her in her tracks, that it's Quiv, sitting there with a drink like he owns the place, telling her it's been a while. Sedona isn't exactly thrilled, asking him why he's throwing himself a private drinking party without any permission. Quiv just laughs and says he's bad, explaining he actually showed up a lot earlier than he planned to, but Sedona just stares at him, clearly recognizing him as Quiv. He drops the act and gets a bit more serious, saying there's something more important they need to discuss. Sedona asks him what the current situation is like back in the royal capital, and Quiv takes a drink before he tells her it's a total disaster over there because of the massive scandal the prince started. He says it makes sense people are losing it since the prince banished a marquis daughter, but something feels off. The graduation party was supposed to be a small, private event, yet the rumors reached the commoners way too fast. Sedona thinks it over and says that usually regular people really eat up stories about romance crossing social classes. But Quiv speaks up and tells her that most of the talk he heard was actually just people feeling bad for her. He keeps going, saying that as far as he can tell, it looks like someone is purposely messing with the rumors, and because of how things are being framed, the prince and his little group have seen their reputations completely tank. The weird part is that while the prince looks bad, there's absolutely zero information floating around about his former fiancée. So Quiv mentions the prince is basically just hiding out in the detached palace with that commoner girl right now. On top of all that, the prime minister's son, Alec, who was stuck doing all the actual work, has totally vanished, and it turns out the royal palace actually thinks his disappearance is a much bigger deal than the prince's drama. Quiv guesses that Alec was likely the one behind the scenes, pulling the strings on all the information, working to swing public opinion in her favor, while making sure no one could find out where she actually went. Quiv points out that Sedona has a pretty mean look on her face right now and asks if she actually likes Diana that much, since Sedona just gives him a simple yes. It's definitely a bad situation that Diana couldn't pick who she served, but just feeling sorry for her isn't going to be enough to fix her reputation, especially considering she's a girl who was officially kicked out and sent away to live in a place like this. Sedona smiles and says she's sticking around because Diana is just way too interesting to ignore. She admits that, when they first met, she figured Diana was just another noble girl playing games. But it turns out she was wrong because Diana never once looked down on them for their social standing. Instead, she treated Sedona like a total equal without any judgment at all. But then Quiv changes the subject and asks if Diana even realizes that Sedona is actually an informant just like him. Quiv thinks Diana sounds like a pretty interesting girl, and Sedona agrees, mentioning how cute it was that she looked at her with such sparkling eyes. Sedona keeps talking, wondering why a noble like her would bother playing the part of a regular commoner, and that's the whole reason she's so curious about her. But then she starts thinking about the mystery man behind the scenes. She wonders who this Viscount Cole guy really is, while at the same time Quiv looks at his papers and thinks about the person who gave him the specific order to protect her. The next morning, Diana is lying in bed at the mansion, looking pretty tired as she starts to wake up. She blinks against the light, groggily asking herself if it's already morning. But then her mind drifts back to a memory from her old life, back to a loud night at a bar in Japan where someone suddenly screams out in surprise. Her old coworker is pointing right at her, insisting that some guy named Tanaka-senpai is definitely into her, but Diana just sits there at the bar counter, trying to play it cool by saying they were only going to check out an event together. The girl from Diana's past life keeps yelling that there's no way, and she's losing it because you don't just go scouting alone with some guy like that. She rubs her head in total frustration, telling Diana that there's honestly no point in even trying to explain how romance works, especially since she thinks Diana's romance skills are actually worse than a little kid's, which Diana thinks is a pretty harsh thing to say. Then the girl changes the subject and asks how that game she recommended is going, and Diana finally realizes which one she's talking about. She admits she's actually totally hooked on it right now, which comes as a huge surprise to her coworker. Her friend says she really thought Diana was the kind of person who would never get into autumn games, and Diana snaps back that she shouldn't have that attitude since she's the one who recommended it in the first place. The girl just ignores that and asks who her favorite character is, but Diana has no idea what she even means by that. She explains that the story is super dense with tons of branching paths, so she can't let her guard down when she's making choices, leaving her friend completely confused. Diana keeps going on about how the characters' stats matter, and the events are essential, treating the romance game like a total strategy mission that I end the dream. Diana says she's going for that reverse harem, ending just like her friend suggested. But she admits that keeping track of all the different flags in the game is way harder than she ever imagined, though she's making sure to check a wiki, so she doesn't miss anything. Her friend stops her right there, yelling that all she really wants to know is Diana's type, and which guy in the game she actually likes the most. Diana just looks completely exhausted and tells her friend she's got to be kidding with those kinds of questions. The girl just sighs and slumps over. That definitely wasn't the kind of review she wanted to hear about the game. Diana finally wakes up in her room, staring at the curtains and realizing it was all just a nostalgic dream. She knows that the version of her who used to grab drinks at bars with her best friend doesn't exist anymore. Now her reality is different. She is the daughter of Marquis Ames, and she spent the last 17 years living her life as Diana, leaving her old world far behind. Diana thinks about how these memories have been part of her since she was just a kid, seeing herself as if she were still living that past life just a moment ago, especially when the memories come back as dreams. She starts remembering all the guys from the game. There was the arrogant prince and the smart one with glasses, not to mention the hot-blooded knight, the older guy, the playboy, and even that younger tsundere type. Looking back, she only really started playing that autumn game because her best friend recommended it, though she struggles to remember everyone, like that two-faced puppy boy who was part of the group. Actually, it was more like her friend just grabbed her phone and installed the game without even asking. So she wasn't really into it at first, but then she saw how the game was actually built. Turns out, there were way more completionist elements than she expected, and as she kept playing, she realized the choices were actually pretty tough, which made it fun and got her hooked in no time. Back then, Diana was obsessed with hitting every event in the game, just making sure she never picked a wrong choice anyway. Her whole focus was just getting that recommended reverse harem ending. Thinking back on it, the ending was really the only thing she cared about. She didn't actually give a single thought to the characters themselves. Diana tries to think if there was even one character she actually liked, starting with the prince. Since she spent the most time with him, he's a definite no because she just can't stand arrogant guys. It hits her that she was exactly the same way back in her past life too. She admits the Baron's daughter is actually pretty impressive, since the heroine is doing exactly what she's supposed to, literally making every single guy in the game fall for her at the same time. Even if that works for a game story, there are still a few things about this world that really bother her. Thinking about how the game usually goes, Diana figures that if it ends with a reverse harem, the heroine is definitely going to be the queen, but there's still one thing that's been on her mind lately. She starts wondering what's actually going to happen to all the other guys who were supposed to be captured, especially since, besides her brother Jurel, every single one of them is an heir to a major noble family. It just doesn't seem realistic to her. She questions if guys with that much power would really just give everything up to serve one girl, wondering if they'd actually be willing to stay single for the rest of their lives, just for the sake of the story ending. Aside from the game logic, she's also a bit curious about what her father and everyone back home are doing right now, though she realizes she'll probably get those answers soon enough without even trying. The next morning, Diana wakes up and stretches, asking herself what she should get into today. She's thinking about maybe working on the garden behind the mansion when Sedona walks into the room to get her attention. She lets herself in and says, "Excuse me," getting straight to the point by telling Diana that she has a visitor waiting to see her. Diana stands there wondering who could possibly be visiting her house, especially since it's so early in the morning. Sedona explains that it's actually Lord Lazulite who showed up, and she's already let him into the drawing room to wait. Diana remembers they did talk about going for a walk yesterday, but she definitely wasn't expecting him to be here at the crack of dawn. She tells Sedona she's got it, and asks her to tell the guy to just hang out for a bit while she goes to get ready. But Sedona stops her before she can leave, mentioning that the Lord had one more message he wanted to pass along. The invitation is for her to join him for breakfast right now, and the news makes Diana look like her soul is leaving her body. She starts panicking because she never agreed to do all this stuff together, mentally begging Sedona to save her from this social disaster. After getting dressed, Diana finally heads down the big staircase in the mansion looking like she's ready to face the day. She walks up to him and apologizes for making him wait, addressing him casually as Lord Alec while he just gives her a smile. Alec gently takes her hand and tells her not to worry about it, saying he's the one who should apologize for dropping by so early. Alec looks over at Diana, mentioning that even though he went over everything with her yesterday, there's actually something else he's been meaning to ask her as they walk together through the town. Alec tells himself he has to be really careful about how he brings this up, but as they pass by the big clock tower in the middle of the square, he realizes things aren't going quite how he planned, that he looks back at how cute Diana was earlier, just happily holding onto a stuffed animal, and Diana sits there with her tea, admitting she honestly just ended up having a great time on their stroll. But then she spots something weird nearby and starts thinking back to the dark times. She knew the whole condemnation thing was coming eventually, but actually dealing with everyone's hate and malice in person was a whole different story. That it really wasn't a good feeling, especially with all the non-stop whispering that seemed to follow her every time she moved through a room, those total lies and rumors people kept spreading. Diana clenches her fist, trying to stay calm and telling herself she's going to be just fine. Diana stares off into space, reminding herself that everything happening is just a classic trope. She spent 7 years trying to stay calm by telling herself that. But now that she's finally free from all that struggle, she can't help but feel like her life is actually fun for once. She's so caught up in not wanting this feeling to end that she doesn't notice Alec calling her name until she jumps in surprise. Alec just looks at her with a bit of a smile, while Diana realizes she totally spaced out right in front of him. Diana tells herself she really let her guard down this time, but Alec just moves the conversation along, explaining that since their talk yesterday got cut short, he decided to come see her even if it seemed a little pushy. Diana smiles and agrees, though she mentions she didn't expect him to show up this early in the morning. She watches him take a sip of his tea, realizing the guy is completely unfazed by the awkward timing. Alec just gives a little shrug, admitting he can't really argue with her on that one. Diana looks at him closely, her thoughts centering entirely on Lord Alec. Diana drops a total bombshell by asking Alec if he's planning to report her to the prince. He's so caught off guard that he completely chokes on his tea, coughing and trying to get a word out while Diana starts overthinking things. She realizes that even though they grew up in the same circles, they weren't actually friends. Any time they spent together in the past was just because of the prince, and they barely even spoke back when they were both at the academy. It hits her that they were never the type of people to just take a casual walk together like this, and she gets a little suspicious. She looks at him closely, reminding herself that when everything went down, on the day she was publicly called out and dumped, Alec was right there in the middle of it. She vividly remembers him standing by the heroine's side, which makes his sudden interest in her feel pretty shady. She starts to get a bit worried, realizing she can't just take his kindness at face value. She tells herself she has to get to the bottom of his actual motives. Alec stays quiet, looking pretty serious as Diana decides she needs to know if he's a threat to her new life, but Alec just gives a simple nod. Alec looks down, admitting he can't blame Diana for being suspicious of him after everything he's done. He knows she might not believe him, but he tries to explain the truth about her being kicked out, that he tells her he actually had no clue about the banishment until the day of the party, which catches Diana off guard. Alec stares off, mentioning he also believed things were fine right up until that specific day. Diana points out that he was supposed to be the prince's right-hand man, and Alec quietly confirms that's true, but then he clenches his fist tightly, looking like there's more to the story. The truth is, he says, he never actually had the prince's trust like everyone thought. He realizes it's weird to say all this now since he failed to help her back then, but he bows his head low, telling Diana he's incredibly sorry he wasn't able to save her from the exile. He tells her he's just glad she's safe, leaving Diana totally confused since this definitely isn't how she thought this talk would go. Alec looks down, sounding pretty rough as he says Diana must hate him for bullying that girl. Diana looks completely shocked and asks if he's really the one saying something like that to her. She's so stunned she can barely get a word out, just staring at him as she starts to speak. Alec catches her off guard by saying she never actually did any bullying, leaving Diana totally speechless. She finally finds her voice and asks why he would even think that about her. But then Alec explains that he lightly questioned the ladies who set her up to get the real story. Diana gets a bit creeped out, saying the lightly part is what actually scares her and wondering if those girls are even okay. Alec fixes his glasses and brings up the Baron's daughter, making it clear he has zero feelings for her. He adds that because of that, he has no plan to defend her at all, which just leaves Diana looking at him and realizing he's being totally honest. She can tell he's definitely not lying to her. Diana sits there with her hands folded in her lap, telling Alec she finally understands what he's talking about. Alec looks down and thanks her, then casually mentions that there's no reason to even try contacting the prince. He drops a total bombshell by saying he already resigned as the prince's aide, which makes Diana completely lose it. Diana is just making noise at this point, but Alec ignores the panic and says he just couldn't fix the prince's attitude back at school. He adds that he was kept in the dark about the prince's final choice anyway, leaving Diana looking totally dizzy and confused. Diana can't believe it because this guy was basically destined to be the king's right-hand man one day. She just stares at him, thinking about how he had such a massive future ahead of him while someone knocks at the door. Diana realizes the story has changed so much that he won't even be part of the game's harem anymore, right as Alec hands her a tray. The door swings open, and Bart shows up in the room with a small smile like he's just checking in. Diana looks over at him, sounding pretty surprised to see Bart standing right there. Bart gives her a warm smile, telling Diana he's just really relieved to see that she's doing okay. But Diana is completely frozen, thinking back to the night she's positive she ended things with him. Alec speaks up, calling him Prince Bart and asking what brings him by, while also thanking him for making the trip. Bart just apologizes for the surprise visit, though Alec tells him it's really not a problem. Diana watches them, thinking about how friendly they're acting and wondering if they were ever even close, since Bart was always just the prince's attendant, and since those guys aren't allowed at the academy, she usually only ever ran into him when she was visiting the royal palace. The two of them would spend time together in the palace gardens while Bart filled in who would always ditch Diana after a single dance at balls just to chase after the baron's daughter. Looking back on it all, Diana realizes what a total jerk the prince actually is and suddenly feels like cursing the guy. Diana realizes that once she stopped hanging around the prince, her chances of seeing Bart pretty much vanished too, but then a new thought suddenly hits her. Since Alec was actually the prince's top aide, he definitely spent way more time with Bart than she ever did. Bart speaks up and addresses Diana, saying he still can't believe Alec actually became the owner of this whole place. Alec just smiles and admits he was pretty surprised himself, while Diana and Sedona just stand there completely stunned by how casual they are. Diana asks if Bart already knew everything, and he confirms that he's in the loop. Bart explains that the moment he heard Alec had managed to find where she was staying, he just couldn't sit still and do nothing. Alec adds to the story, mentioning that Bart actually showed up at his inn late last night, and once Alec shared what he'd heard from Dee, Bart insisted on coming over immediately to make sure Diana was okay. Alec explains that's exactly why he brought Bart along today, and it finally makes sense to Diana, but even though a few things are still nagging at her, she decides to just let it slide, stepping toward Bart to get his attention. She looks him in the eye and tells him she's been really wanting to apologize, mentioning how he looked like he was in so much pain the day he came to see her at the BRC. She tells him she's sorry for not being able to tell him the truth back then, referring to the day she was officially cast out. Diana looks down at her hands and admits that after being alone for such a long time, it actually made her happy to know someone was worried about her. She gives him a real smile and thanks him for caring, leaving Bart standing there totally stunned as he says her name. Diana tries to cheer Bart up by flexing and telling him she's way tougher than she looks, while Bart just watches her with a small, quiet smile on his face. He laughs a bit and tells her she's exactly the same as she's always been, but Diana doesn't find it that funny. She tells him not to laugh and promises she'll learn the sword eventually, asking him what he thinks she's even aiming for, which is when Alec chimes in that he mentions how surprised he is that the two of them talk to each other so casually. So Diana explains that a lot has gone down between them over the years. She mentions how Bart was always the one who kept her company whenever she just wanted someone to talk to, and Bart smiles, agreeing that it's true. He adds that because of the way things were, he ended up acting as a stand-in for the prince pretty often, and admits he was honestly worried she'd attract some annoying people at the academy, but he realizes now that the prince was actually the one who ended up attracting a total pest. Alec glares at Bart with a look that could kill, asking him if he's forgetting who he's talking to. Bart doesn't seem to care and tells Diana she's going to get in trouble with the prince, but then laughs it off. He mentions he isn't even the prince's servant anymore, which catches Diana off guard as she asks if he quit. Bart just smiles and says he was already thinking about leaving his position soon anyway. He explains that his exit just happened a bit faster than he thought it would, leaving Diana wondering if that's really the whole story, but Alec suddenly interrupts, saying he has something urgent to handle. Diana is totally confused by the sudden shift in the mood as she looks over at him. Alec completely changes his tone and asks Diana if she wants to grab some lunch since it's getting late. He points out all the food they have ready and suggests they just finish their talk after they eat. Diana decides to dig in and looks completely happy once she finally tastes how good the food is. Diana is totally loving the food and says it's delicious, while Alec watches her with a bit of a nervous look. Bart just smiles, relieved they managed to pull the meal off somehow. But Diana is acting so casual that it makes everyone forget just how serious their current situation actually is. She turns to Alec and asks if he doesn't agree with her, and Alec realizes he doesn't really have a choice but to say yes, which leaves Diana feeling pretty flattered. Alec takes a calm sip of his tea and decides it's time to shift gears. He gets this intense look in his eyes and asks if they can finally get down to business, which totally catches Diana off guard. This is the real Alexis Lazulite, the guy who was known as the Ice Prince back when they were at the academy, because he always had this freezing cold beauty and a vibe that made him seem completely unapproachable, that he really proved himself back then as the actual brains behind the prince's entire inner circle. Mostly because out of everyone on the student council, Diana is pretty sure about one thing. He was the only guy in the whole group who was actually doing any of the work. Diana thinks back on the academy and realizes the whole group felt like the prince and his merry rangers. Recalling the short time, she actually helped the student council out that it turns out that Surashiro was actually kicked out by the prince after only 6 months, even though he was an unofficial member. Looking back, those 6 months she spent there were a total disaster because the prince was always off in his own little world with the baron's daughter, leaving Diana unable to even imagine how that student council managed to get anything done at all. She starts to wonder if Alec was the one who actually had a really rough time dealing with it, since she always assumed he worked so hard for the girl because he was in love with her. But if he wasn't, then his life back then must have been pure agony. Alec notices her staring and asks what's up. So he asks if there's something on his face, but Diana just tells him she was mesmerized by him. Diana tells Alec he just has a really beautiful face. The compliment hits him like a truck, leaving him completely flustered as he tries to hide his blushing face behind a fake cough. Diana just watches him and says she gets it. But then she adds that even though it's weird to brag, she's actually a top-tier beauty herself in the game world. Alec is totally stunned by that eventually. He finds his voice and suggests they keep moving, calling out to her to get things back on track because he understands her point. But he needs her to listen up because the next part is actually about her. Alec addresses her formally as Lady Diana to show he's being serious. She tells him it's fine and to just say whatever is on his mind. So Alec decides to stop the small talk and get straight to the point, looking her right in the eye as he tells her that he needs her to come to the royal capital tomorrow. Diana is caught completely off guard. She can only repeat his words, barely processing that she's being asked to head back there. She looks over at him and asks if he can tell her the reason why he's making such a big request so suddenly. Bart looks down a bit and apologizes, telling Diana that he just can't give her the reason right now. He stirs his tea while adding that even though he's keeping some secrets, there is one thing he wants to share. So he looks at her and says that since they're being honest, he should tell her his real name. He reveals that he's actually Lambert Cole, and he comes from the Viscount Cole family. Diana tries to place the name in her head, but it's definitely not a family she's heard of before. She's pretty shocked to find out Bart is actually a noble, just standing there trying to process the name Lambert. The whole situation has her head spinning. She's seriously struggling to keep up with all these big reveals. Bart just smiles and clarifies that he's actually from a country across the sea, which explains why his family name doesn't ring any bells for her around here. Diana asks if that means he isn't a noble of this kingdom, and Bart tells her she's exactly right. Diana is standing there looking totally stunned, but Lord Alec doesn't seem shaken at all. She thinks back to how they settled things just yesterday, but she starts to wonder maybe he actually knew the truth about everything from the very beginning. She tries to say it out loud, stumbling over the name Lord Lambert like it's a lot to take in. So she asks him why a noble from a neighboring country would be acting as the prince's attendant, and Lambert just smiles, explaining that the whole job is basically his way of studying abroad. Turns out the Cole family has this old rule where they have to go out and work for generations. They keep their noble status a secret while working in the palace, and only the king knows the truth. Diana looks at him and asks if the prince knows about any of this, but Lambert just gives a small smile and says the prince probably has no clue. Lambert starts explaining that 7 years ago, he just happened to catch the prince's eye and got hired as an attendant, and since then, he's kept his noble status a secret just because telling him felt like too much of a hassle. Diana looks completely overwhelmed by the news, so Lord Alec speaks up and tells her that her doubts about everything are totally fair, but he needs her to just come to the royal palace with Lord Lambert for now without asking any more questions. Later on, Diana finally makes it back to the shop where Sedona is waiting to welcome her home. Sedona immediately jumps in and asks how the date went, but Diana just stands there like she doesn't even know where to start, saying it wasn't really a date at all since a bunch of other people ended up joining them halfway through. Sedona can't help but laugh, finding it pretty funny how much things escalated since she left, but then she gets a serious look on her face and tells the owner that there's actually something important they need to talk about. The scene shifts away from the shop to a massive, quiet estate under the afternoon sun. The carriage will keep spinning along the bumpy road, clattering against the dirt as they move. Diana finally starts to wake up, groaning a bit while she tries to figure out where she is until it hits her that she's still a bit out of it. But she clearly remembers that she was riding in the carriage earlier when someone suddenly calls her name, and she snaps her eyes open, looking totally caught off guard. It's Bart, and he gives her a kind smile while apologizing because he figured she must be pretty wiped out. He mentions they're going to be arriving soon, so Diana rubs her eyes and admits she really did pass out fast, but she thanks him for the heads up and asks if she should start calling him Lord Lambert now. Though he says no right away, that he tells her to just stick with calling him Bart, like she always has, since he still feels like just a regular guy. Diana looks pretty stressed about the whole situation, reminding him that based on what Lord Alexis told them, he was never actually a commoner to begin with, and Bart just leans back and agrees that's apparently the truth. Bart keeps things moving, telling Diana that as soon as they get to the capital, they're going straight to the palace, that he adds that he's pretty sure Lord Alexis has already taken care of the details, specifically by setting up a meeting with her family, which completely shocks Diana as she realizes her father is back. She starts overthinking, wondering if her brother Silvio is going to be there with him too. It turns out this whole mess with her being exiled happened while her father and the king were both out of town, but now that word has finally reached her father. Everything is changing, leaving Diana feeling like her life has been one huge surprise after another since just yesterday. Out of everything, the biggest shock is still the guy sitting right across from her realizing that he's actually noble-born and used a fake name, but her mind drifts back to something Sedona mentioned about the very first day she showed up at the shop. It turns out there was a letter hidden right inside Diana's transfer papers, a note specifically ordering that she be kept safe and never forced into anything bad, with Viscount Cole promising to pay for everything. Bart notices her staring and asks if she's okay, but Diana completely panics, yelling that she's fine and just trying to act like nothing is wrong. Bart asks if she's feeling sick, though he quickly apologizes and says he just got lost in his own thoughts for a second, asking her to excuse him while Diana starts piecing things together, remembering that the prince's attendant only showed up a few times in the original game, yet he definitely wasn't a guy you could date. She remembers complaining about that in her past life, thinking this whole situation is a pretty wild setup, and even though Bart is sitting there with a nice smile on his face, she can't help but think the guy is incredibly suspicious. She keeps staring at him, questioning if a guy this handsome with such a massive backstory could ever just be an ordinary person. Then she remembers her best friend from her old life getting drunk at a pub and going on a huge rant about the classic trope of a hidden character, making Diana wonder if that's the real secret Bart has been keeping this whole time. Diana remembers that she was originally aiming for the most difficult reverse harem ending in the game, but everything feels wrong now because Bart was never even supposed to be a capture target in the first place. She stops for a second and thinks back to the walkthrough sites she read in her past life, specifically a news post about a major update. It starts making sense that after she died in her previous world, the game must have kept evolving, showing off the new characters that were added in a massive update to the mobile app. But that raises a much bigger problem for her right now. She can't figure out why Alec and Bart are even hanging around her, or if they're actually planning to be on her side through all this. She knows for a fact she never tried to romance either of them while playing the game as Diana, so she feels like the heroine's path is totally broken and the entire ending is just flying off the rails. Just then, she's pulled out of her thoughts as they arrive at a massive castle, the sight of it giving her a weirdly nostalgic feeling. Alec gives a small smile and points out that the big party was only 10 days ago. Diana looks pretty stressed as she says she knows, but it's clear the timing is still messing with her head. She starts thinking back to that day, remembering how intense everything felt back then. Alec gets a serious look in his eyes and mentions how he honestly never thought he'd be coming back to a place like this. But then a messenger shows up and asks if she's Lady Diana. She looks a bit unsure, but confirms that it's her. And then the guy explains that he was sent directly by Lord Alexis to meet her, that he apologizes for keeping her waiting out there, and tells her he's going to personally escort her inside the castle walls, leading her toward the main building while telling her to follow him this way. When they get to the doors, Diana just offers a quick thank you as she gets ready to head inside. She pauses for a split second, looking nervous as her hand reaches out to open the door, but suddenly someone bursts out and screams her nickname, making her jump in surprise. Diana freezes up the second she hears that voice. It's way too familiar, and before she can even move, her brother Silvio pulls her into a massive hug. He tells her he heard the whole story from Alec and knows she's been through a nightmare, and then he goes on about how the second he got the news, he almost ditched his trip and turned right back around shouting that some neighboring country doesn't matter at all compared to her. Diana just gives a nervous nod, but the guy standing with them has to step in, telling Lord Silvio that Diana is literally going to suffocate if he keeps squeezing her like that. Silvio jumps back and apologizes right away, realizing he went a bit overboard with the Di nickname and the hug. He takes a second to look at her and mentions that her complexion actually looks great, but then he gives her this really soft, proud smile and tells her she did a great job handling everything. Diana feels a huge wave of relief and just smiles back, telling him yeah, she really did, but deep down she's losing it, wondering why her brother isn't one of the main capture targets since he's so perfect, though she's also glad he's far away from all that drama. Silvio looks a little confused and asks if he's got something on his face, but Diana just tells him she's feeling a bit emotional. Then an attendant steps up and tells Lady Diana to follow him because it's time to move. The queen is already waiting and tells Diana that everyone is ready for her, which makes Diana wonder who exactly she means by everyone, and then she sees the king himself standing there. Diana is totally caught off guard and barely manages to say Your Majesty, as she immediately drops into a deep bow, apologizing for being so rude in front of him. The king tells her it's all good and asks her to raise her head, while the queen just stands by watching the whole thing. Diana quietly says yes and looks up, but as she scans the room, she starts to freak out a little. She notices the prime minister is right there, and then realizes that basically every major official in the entire country is packed into this one room. As she's taking it all in, she sees that Bart has already slipped away and is standing perfectly in place behind Alec. Diana stares at the crowd, thinking to herself that she never heard anything about all these officials being here. She turns to Alec and calls him out, asking why he looks so happy about this whole situation. Suddenly, a middle-aged noble guy steps forward and sighs out Diana's name. Diana looks over and realizes it's her father. She can barely speak, looking like she's about to burst into tears. She grips her dress tightly, thinking about how much he must regret everything that's gone down lately. She starts thinking back to how much he loved her growing up, mostly because she looked just like her mom who passed away. Honestly, he didn't just love her, he completely spoiled her rot in her entire life. Diana remembers that in the original story, she was supposed to fall for the prince the moment she saw him at 10 years old, and then she was meant to use her family's influence to trap him into an engagement. But things went totally different this time, and she ended up engaged to him without even trying. All these old memories start hitting Diana at once, and she remembers exactly how soul-crushing it felt when they first told her she was going to be Prince Sephiroth's wife. She starts questioning if the original Diana from the game was only so selfish, because of how she was raised, basically wondering if her dad and brother, doting on her constantly, is what turned her into a villain in the first place. But then the king speaks up, looking right at her, and saying he knows exactly what's been going on lately. He tells her that Alexis sent a letter explaining all the dumb stuff the prince has been doing behind his back. Looking at her seriously, the king says he can't stand by the way his son treated her or the punishment he tried to give her, making it very clear that taking away her noble status is totally off the table and won't be happening, that he promises to make things right after the prince trashed her reputation like that, leaving Diana standing there in total shock. The reality was that the prince and his inner circle had become completely obsessed with a girl who was just a baron's daughter at the academy. It got so bad that the prince ignored everyone's warnings and decided to end the engagement right in front of everyone. Alexis sits by the light of a small lamp, writing down the details of how the prince ordered Diana to be stripped of her noble status and sent away. He writes that this whole mess is a total scandal that's honestly putting the country's entire reputation at risk. So he finishes the letter by advising an immediate return to the capital to figure out some countermeasures, signing his name at the bottom. Back in the present, Diana looks at Alexis and asks him if he just said he was the one who sent a letter about that whole public breakup scene. It turns out Alexis had been reporting everything to the king, specifically regarding what was going on with that baron's daughter. Alexis explains that he didn't just stop there, mentioning that he'd actually been talking the situation over with someone else, that he'd been consulting his own father, who happens to be the prime minister, for quite a while now. Everything starts clicking for Diana, as she remembers that back when the heroine first showed up in the story, she actually went straight to her father to talk about breaking off the engagement herself, feeling pretty happy about the whole idea at the time. But her brother Silvio just told her she's way more beautiful than the other girl and needs more confidence. She thanks him while thinking that's not what she meant at all. The whole plan to get out of the engagement ended in a total failure. Alexis notes that the prince's new relationship became the talk of the town fast, and Diana can't help but agree with how crazy it all is. She gets worked up thinking about how that girl, a complete nobody with no background, is actually going to become the queen. Silvio is furious, yelling that it's a slap in the face to his mother, who spent years as Diana's tutor, that he gets so heated he snaps his pen right in half. Diana thinks back on the 7 long years she spent receiving a strict royal education from the queen. It was more than enough time for her and Her Majesty to build a real sense of trust, even if the training was intense. She remembers trying to slack off just once to see if she could get the engagement cancelled. But the very next day her workload just doubled. She realized pretty quick that fighting back was pointless and gave up. Looking back, she realizes that as long as she took her work seriously, the king was actually pretty kind to her. Then Alexis reaches out, asking her to please accept his own apologies for everything that's happened. Alexis' father looks pretty serious as he explains that normally his son should have been the one to take charge and fix this whole mess. But he admits it seems like his own personal goals got in the way meanwhile. Alec just stands there looking completely stressed out. Diana is caught off guard by the mention of Alec's ambition, wondering what that's all about. She realizes the plan was really just focused on making sure she stayed on their side through all the drama. The older man looks down, telling his son to forgive his pathetic father for how things went south. He goes on to say that if he had actually known things would end up like this after hearing what Alec told him, he would have just gone straight to the king to get the engagement cancelled a long time ago. Suddenly, a new guy chimes in, saying the situation is embarrassing especially since the prince had someone named Jurel helping him. This blonde guy just stands there by the window, looking way too calm with a little smirk on his face. He tells the others to fill him in, mentioning he warned the prince to watch that baron's daughter closely, and his subordinate quickly agrees that it's honestly hard for her to believe that he actually decided to take their side in all of this. Jurel mentions he was probably a bit too quick to leave the whole situation in the prince's hands, but Diana is just standing there completely shocked. She tells herself she had absolutely no idea Jurel was even playing a part like that behind the scenes. Meanwhile, Alexis's father is losing his temper, calling his own son an idiot and a total disgrace to all the knights. He keeps going, apologizing for his son being an accomplice to the whole mess. Diana can barely find the words to ask if he's actually the duke, that she's totally overwhelmed seeing all these high-ranking people apologizing to her at the same time and looking down. She starts to realize something about herself and how she handled things. She admits to herself that she wasn't exactly facing the problem head-on and definitely had her own faults to deal with, mostly because she just assumed the engagement was going to get cancelled anyway. Even after 7 years together, she never really tried to build a real relationship with the prince or take him seriously. Seeing Alec and Bart standing right there by her side, Diana starts thinking about how she probably could have found a way to work things out with everyone else too if she had just tried. She realizes she was so caught up in the fact that she couldn't end the engagement that she spent all her time worrying about game tropes and the plot forcing things to happen. Suddenly, Bart raises his hand and politely asks if he can say something to the group. The king looks over and addresses him as Viscount Cole, correcting himself right away. The king gives him the floor, and as Bart thanks him, Diana just stands there completely confused because she can't believe her ears after hearing the king call him by a noble title like that. It hits her that he isn't just some noble's kid, but that he's actually the Viscount himself, making her wonder if there's a lot more to his story than she ever realized. Bart keeps his cool and addresses the room with total respect, but he makes it clear that he can't just stay quiet after the prince treated Diana so badly. He tells everyone that Diana has no interest in making up with the guy and brings up how at every party, the prince only bothered to dance with her for one song, which starts making Alec look pretty worried as Bart drops another bomb about how he was the one actually writing back to all of Diana's letters and gifts the whole time. Diana completely loses it because she had no clue the prince's new girl was actually talking to Kurt. Bart keeps going, explaining how the prince even banned Diana from the student council, strictly so he could clear his schedule and spend every single second hanging out with the baron's daughter and planning things out behind Diana's back. The group talks about how those secret meetings happened right where Diana could see them, and how the prince never even tried to find out the actual truth behind all the nasty rumors going around about Diana. And apparently, there's even more to the story. Alex stands there taking it all in, looking pretty deep in thought as things finally click, so Bart speaks up, telling everyone he doesn't think Diana needs to worry about any of this anymore. Bart gives a friendly smile while Diana thanks him, promising she won't let the past get to her. Even though she's trying to be strong, the stuff they just found out is doing some serious damage, and Alec looks like he's ready to snap, thinking about tearing the prince to pieces while hoping the brother just misheard the details. The king looks completely exhausted by the drama, acknowledging everything Bart, now known as Viscount Cole, just said. Then the king looks over at Diana, telling her she's done a great job putting up with all of this until now. The king looks over at Diana and tells her she must be exhausted after such a long day, and he asks if she can make it back to the castle again tomorrow, which Diana quickly agrees to do. He addresses the whole room, stating they'll make an official announcement about everything tomorrow and making sure everyone is on the same page. The group stands there in a heavy silence as the weight of the day finally starts to settle, so Diana turns her attention toward Bart, calling his name to get a moment of his time. She looks him right in the eye and asks if he's actually the Viscount himself, and Bart doesn't try to hide it anymore. Diana tells him it was pretty messed up of him to play things so close to the chest, acting like he was just some random guy from a low-ranking noble family when she knows the truth, calling him out for being the heir to a family with way more power than he admitted. Bart just gives in, telling Diana she's way more observant than he gave her credit for. Diana gets a look on her face like everything just clicked, thinking to herself that she knew it. She explains how some of the top-tier noble families actually hold onto multiple titles at once, meaning they keep their original family name while the heir uses a different one to blend in. It doesn't make much sense to her why an heir from a family like that would be doing grunt work in a palace halfway across the world. But the pieces are fitting, and she's pretty much positive that her theory about Bart is the real deal. Lambert finally comes clean and tells her that if he were to go by his full family name, he would be Lambert Adolf, the eldest son of the Marquis Adolf family, which confirms everything Diana suspected. This guy is definitely one of those secret hidden characters from the game. Just as the truth comes out, someone walks up and asks the Viscount if he's got a minute to talk. Alec walks up and catches Diana off guard, excusing himself to get her attention, and starts to call her by her nickname before catching himself and saying no instead, right before he addresses her properly as Lady Diana, which leaves her looking pretty shocked as he mentions that even though a lot has gone down lately, he thinks tomorrow will be the last day of it all. He leans in close. It's a super quiet moment between them where he just gets right in her space. Alec looks at her through his glasses with a really serious look on his face, then tells her that he'll see her tomorrow and promises to meet up with her then. So he turns around and starts heading out, leaving her standing there by herself while Diana just freezes up. She's completely red in the face and can't even process what just happened. Moving on to after the big discussion is over, a voice tells the two of them that they were called back for a reason. Some guy starts off by saying this is all about how someone is going to be treated, which the king follows up by asking Alexis Lazulite if he's actually sure about this whole thing. And while Bart just stands there watching, Alexis gives a firm yes. He's not backing down at all. Alexis looks back and realizes he totally messed up his judgment at the worst possible time, but he knows the only reason Lady Diana is okay right now is because of Bart, so he gives credit where it's due, saying everything worked out because Lambert moved fast. Bart takes that in thinking to himself about how it was apparently all thanks to him, and he just keeps a straight face while everyone talks about him like he's the hero of the day. The conversation turns to the fact that Alexis was actually there during the prince's big scene, and since he didn't stop him, he's got some serious soul-searching to do about why he just let the prince go off like that. Alexis stands there thinking about the situation. He says they can't just judge him based on that one thing, or at least that's how it seems. Bart starts thinking back on his time serving as the prince's attendant, which really gives him a unique perspective on everything that he looks pretty focused while wondering what the next move should even be. Things are getting complicated. Bart figures the guy must have gone through a ton of stress and hardship given how long he's been in that position, and he remembers all those times he saw Lord Alexis scolding the prince back at the castle, trying to keep him in line. The conversation shifts to the Baron's daughter, how she was always hanging around the prince, but that's not the whole story. Turns out she was also getting way too close with all the other royal aides at the same time, making things look pretty messy. Bart explains that's exactly what he told the others. even though the memory of their first meeting still makes him shake his head. In a flashback, the prince tells the girl he needs to step away for a second, leaving her standing there alone. As soon as the prince is gone, she just smiles to herself. Bart catches the whole thing and definitely doesn't trust her vibe. Sophia tells the person to have a safe trip, noting that this is actually the first time they've officially met. She introduces herself as Sophia Morgana with a polite smile, saying it's a pleasure to meet him. She lets out a tiny, soft giggle while watching him closely, and then she leans in close and asks if they're going to get along, calling him Bert in this weirdly sweet voice. Bart keeps it professional and tells her he looks forward to working with her while she keeps acting all innocent. But inside, Bart is actually freaking out because the vibe she's giving off is just wrong. He starts sweating, thinking about how that fake sweet voice of hers literally gave him goosebumps. Bart can't believe the prince really fell for a woman like this, and honestly, he thinks Diana would have been way better. He admits that Diana is so perfect it's almost hard to approach her, which was the real problem. Bart knew the prince always felt like he was living in her shadow. Bart keeps thinking back to how Diana really was. Once you actually talked to her, she was just a normal girl who would laugh at jokes and really listen to whatever her servants had to say. They used to walk together all the time, and her personality was so down-to-earth that Bart almost doubted she was even a noble lady. He never expected to end up as her servant, but he felt lucky getting to spend that time with her as an attendant, even though his original plan was to head back to his own country as soon as he finished his royal duties and hit 18 in 6 months. But then everything shifted on that day of judgment, and Bart remembers asking for clarification because he couldn't believe his ears, that he just stood there in shock asking the prince what he actually just said, and the prince just looked him in the eye while holding a scroll, telling Bart that he already said it, giving the order that as soon as the party was over, Bart was supposed to take Diana straight to a brothel. The prince starts walking away like it's nothing. He just tells Bart to make sure all the paperwork for Diana's exile gets signed and finished, leaving Bart standing there completely losing it, yelling for the prince to wait up because he can't believe what's happening. That he looks at Diana from behind, still stuck on the fact that he's been ordered to take her to a brothel. Bart starts sweating, wondering if he's really supposed to do this to her with his own hands. He knows he has to find a way to stop it, that he thinks about just taking her back to his home country, but realizes a high-ranking noble girl vanishing would cause a massive scene, so he comes up with a different plan. He just needs to keep things moving until his preparations are actually ready. He grabs a pen and ink, deciding it's time to finally use his real title as Viscount Cole to set things in motion. The goal is to get Diana to give him a job and a place to stay at her shop. That way he can keep her safe while letting the rest of the world believe the lie that she really was sent away to a brothel. Whether the prince and his friends were actually happy with that outcome or not, they didn't bother checking in on her ever again. Bart makes his final decision and officially resigns from his job as the prince's attendant, which means he's finally moving on with his own plan, just as someone nearby calls him by his real title, Lord Lambert, that he gets an urgent update from an informant who tells him that Lord Alexis Lazulite has already made contact, finding her right at the brothel where she was sent. Bart takes the news calmly, just telling the guy he did a good job with the report before closing his book with a loud snap. He thinks about Alexis for a second, knowing the guy is smart enough to be a problem, so he realizes he can't just sit around even if Alexis isn't a total fool like the prince. Bart still needs to get moving and head over there to give the guy a warning, just to make sure nothing goes sideways. The problem is the carriage ride to the place Diana is staying takes about half a day, so it's not exactly a quick trip, especially since it's definitely going to be dark by the time he finally pulls up to the shop. He sighs at the timing because he was already planning to head out and pick her up first thing tomorrow morning anyway. Ever since the day Diana was sent away to that place, things have been moving behind the scenes. Bart has been keeping a very close eye on everything through the secret guards he assigned to watch over her, and he also has shadows tracking every single move the prince makes. That he stands there thinking it over, realizing that even with all that surveillance, he hasn't actually received any reports that seem particularly worrying yet. The prince is the main one on his mind. The guy is totally obsessed with the Baron's daughter, Sophia, who is always putting on a show. Bart honestly can't wrap his head around what anyone sees in a girl who just flirts with everyone like that, and it clearly exhausts him just thinking about her fake sugary sweet attitude. He knows some guys are just suckers for that kind of act, but now his focus shifts entirely to Lord Alexis. He adjusts his collar and looks ahead with a serious face, wondering exactly what kind of man Alexis is going to turn out to be. The carriage continues its long trip through the night, eventually pulling up right in front of the local inn. Bart goes through the records but doesn't find Lord Alexis Lazulite's name anywhere in the ledger. It confirms what he thought, so he checks with the innkeeper, who tells him someone actually saw a guy matching that description. She says she already sent for them and asks him to wait a second, so Bart thanks her and heads off. He's just about to move when Alexis shows up and is completely shocked to see him there. Bart keeps it cool and tells him it's been a long time, but Alexis is still reeling that he says he was caught off guard because he only heard that some random noble had come to visit. Alexis looks him over, getting serious, and asks if Bart is acting as one of the prince's men now. Bart realizes the hallway is way too public for this kind of talk, so he tells Alexis they should move the conversation to his room, that he opens the door to let Alexis inside, and Alexis steps through while apologizing for the intrusion. Once they're behind closed doors, Alexis doesn't waste any time. He says he's going to be blunt about things, and he looks Bart right in the eye, demanding to know why he's going around introducing himself as just some noble. Alexis watches Bart from behind, thinking to himself that Bart should really be considered a former follower of the royals by now that he's still trying to piece it together, so he asks Bart if he's acting as an envoy for the prince, but then says he gets it, and Bart doesn't leave him guessing. He looks him right in the eye and says he's actually that noble everyone was talking about. Alexis just stands there in total silence, staring at his old friend, that he finally finds his voice and asks what Bart even means by that. But Bart just shrugs it off and says it's exactly what he just said. Bart addresses him formally as Lord Alexis, telling him that he believes the two of them are actually after the same goals. So he brings up how he heard Alexis step down from being the prince's aide right after he resigned himself. Bart reminds him that if he had just stayed by the prince's side, he'd be the prime minister right now, but he threw it away, and Bart says he knows exactly why Alexis is acting this way and why he gave up such a huge position, that he tells him straight up that it's all because Alexis is still thinking about Lady Diana and how she was exiled to the BRC. Alexis stands there in silence, clearly processing everything Bart just said. Bart doesn't stop there, pointing out that he can't think of any other reason why Alexis would quit being an aide so fast after the exile. Bart puts a hand over his heart and admits that he's also someone who truly cares about making sure she stays safe. So Alexis looks down and admits that while it might not seem like much, he's already taken some steps of his own to look out for her. Bart explains that's the whole reason he walked away from his job as the prince's attendant in the first place, and he looks at Alexis with a small smile, asking if they should just start working together right now since they're both on the same side. He suggests they start swapping information to help each other out, which catches Alexis completely off guard, but Bart just keeps smiling, telling him that this deal really shouldn't be a loss for him at all. Alexis gets a serious look in his eyes and says if Bart is really willing to share what he knows, then he'll tell him everything too. Bart is actually shocked when he hears the details. He repeats the part about buying out her brother and says he can't believe Alexis has already gone that far. Bart starts thinking it over, wondering why Diana would even go through with something like that, especially since Alexis is right there to tell him that she wouldn't say a word about it to him. He looks back on how she acted and realizes she probably knew everything that was going to happen from the start. So Bart takes a second to process that and says he finally gets it now. It hits him that she probably intended to face every single bit of this trouble all by herself. But Alexis reminds him that she's been moving like this from the very beginning of the whole mess. Alexis looks down and admits that Diana probably still views him with a ton of caution since she sees him as someone on the prince's side. Bart looks him in the eye and tells him that given his high-ranking position, it really couldn't be helped, and he adds that between the heavy workload at the academy and the chaos of the situation, it wasn't something Alexis could have handled alone. Alexis gives a quiet thank you and then mentions that he's already made plans to go see her again tomorrow. Alexis asks Bart if he'd want to go see her too, especially since Bart replies that while he's been getting all the regular reports, he still wants to head out there and see with his own eyes that she's actually safe. They agree to make the move tomorrow, walking off to get things ready for the trip. Alexis realizes Dee is the one helping her, thinking how the most difficult guy possible ended up on her side. The scene shifts back to a conversation where Alexis is asked if he's really sure he won't change his mind, but he stands his ground, explaining that since he was the prince's top aide and spent the most time by his side, he feels he needs to take some responsibility. He tells them that if he's the only one who gets off easy, the public isn't going to be happy about it. That's when the king speaks up, telling Alexis there's no reason for him to throw his life away over the mistakes of his foolish son. The king tells Alexis that everything he did came from his loyalty to Diana. Alexis just stands there, taking it all in while the king asks if he's really okay with never seeing her again. It hits hard and Alexis looks down, admitting that even if he had his reasons, he's still the one who put her in danger, that he thinks about how that time must have been filled with nothing but regret and pain, especially for Bart, who spent all those days searching for Diana totally on his own. Alexis knows what that's like, and as someone who shares those same feelings, he understands that specific kind of pain all too well. But then he realizes something funny. While he and Bart were both miserable and agonizing, Diana basically just ignored the prince's schemes and went about her business. She's standing there smiling, totally unbothered, having the time of her life and enjoying every single day to the fullest. Bart thinks about how glad he is that Diana is safe, but he can't help feeling a little lonely that she managed to get through it all without needing him, that he realizes that in her eyes, he's still nothing more than her loyal attendant, Bart. Since he's still a long way from being seen as a man she could actually love, Bart turns to the king and Alexis with a bold proposal, suggesting they all play fair as rivals. Back at the Marquis Amdes estate, Diana stands in front of the grand building, taking it all in until Silvio notices her staring and asks if something is wrong. Diana smiles and tells him that even though it's only been 10 days, she feels weirdly nostalgic, laughing about how strange the whole situation is. Silvio just watches her, while the focus shifts to hands coming together as someone mentions they're finally handing them over. Diana gets cut off immediately as someone tells her that what she just said isn't true at all. Silvio looks down at her with a gentle smile, though he seems a bit intense while welcoming her home. Diana starts to get a little worried, looking up at her brother and calling out to him. But Silvio is focused on the fact that it's the fault of the people who forced her away, making her feel like a stranger in her own house. Diana asks if he's still in a bad mood, noticing his scary aura just as a voice from the entrance welcomes Silvio back. Silvio drops the dark act and thanks the head butler for the warm greeting, while the butler turns to Diana, telling her how genuinely happy he is to see her back safe. Diana gives him a bright smile and thanks him. This is Raymond, the head butler of the estate, a man who is completely loyal to Diana's father and has earned the family's total trust over the years. Diana looks at Raymond, remembering how he's taken such good care of her and her brother since they were kids, and moving back to the day before the party, he was actually the only person she told about her plan for the condemnation back then. Raymond looked at her pretty worried and asked what she meant by all that. Diana didn't back down, just telling him it meant exactly what she said before clarifying that the very next day, she was scheduled to be sent away from the capital. Raymond was completely caught off guard, barely able to get a word out from the shock, and as he demanded to know what was going on, Diana just calmly told him it was normal for him to be surprised. She looked at him with a serious expression, making it clear that the matter was already settled and done. The head butler stood there looking totally crushed by the news, finally finding his voice just to ask her why it had to happen like this. Diana goes on to explain that she's being framed as the one who harassed the girl, and Raymond just stands there looking completely shocked by the news. She keeps going, mentioning that the prince has apparently found someone he actually loves. She gives a little tired smile while saying it looks like she's the one who's going to be punished for everything, but Raymond doesn't want to hear it, telling her he finds it impossible to believe that someone like Lady Diana would ever do something so terrible. Diana just calmly looks back at him and says she hasn't actually done a single thing. She looks pretty cold as she thinks back to the prince and his group, noting that even if she's innocent, none of that matters because at the party tomorrow, she's going to be standing there with absolutely no allies to back her up. She makes it clear that she's going to be publicly called out and denounced by the prince and his whole circle, ending with a simple comment that that's just how things are going to go. Raymond looks totally stressed out by the plan, finally losing his cool and shouting that there's no way her father or the rest of the family would ever let something like that happen. Diana points out the obvious that the king and his top people are all away from the capital right now, which is exactly why the prince set the party for tomorrow. With his father out of the way, there's nobody around to keep him in check, and all the power to make decisions has been handed over to him, that it's a perfect trap, and Diana knows she's stuck on her own until her own father finally makes it back. She looks pretty focused as she realizes she's the only one who can handle this. While Raymond stares at her thinking to himself that he has to find a way to get through this mess no matter what happens to keep her safe. Diana breaks his train of thought, telling the head butler that she actually has a favor to ask of him. She starts explaining that things took a weird turn once her father actually got back home. She'd already set up a ride with her brother's people, but her father showed up out of nowhere and called out her name. Diana looks totally caught off guard as she greets him. Then the head of the Marquis house tells her it's been way too long since she's been home and she needs to just relax for the day, that he suggests they all grab dinner together as a family, and Raymond bows, telling his master that he understands the plan. Diana finally makes it to her room and lets out a massive yawn before face-planting straight into her bed, thinking about how good it feels to be home even though she's completely wiped out. She lets out a happy sigh, thinking about how long it's been since the whole family actually sat down for dinner, but her mood shifts instantly as she remembers a major problem, her grip tightening on the bedsheets while she thinks about everyone being together, specifically her younger brother Jurel, who is one of the game's capture targets. She wonders how he's holding up, knowing that technically he is playing for the other team and stands firmly on the prince's side as an ally. Even though they're siblings, Diana knows she couldn't tell him anything beforehand because the prince would have figured out her plan immediately. So she made it very clear to Raymond that he wasn't allowed to leak a single word to Jurel. She mentions that unlike her eldest brother, she and Jurel grew up close in age, which made things even more complicated. Diana keeps thinking back to the old days, remembering how she and Jurel used to spend all their time playing in the garden. They were actually pretty wild as kids, and used to sneak out of the mansion together whenever they got the chance. The head butler used to catch them and chew them out every single time, but looking back now, it's just crazy to her that her childhood partner in crime is now officially on the enemy side. Her train of thought gets cut off when someone knocks on the door and calls out her name, which turns out to be the staff apologizing for the interruption because they need to get her ready for dinner. Diana sits up and tells them thank you while shaking off the heavy thoughts about her brother. A couple of maids walk into the room to start their work that Diana's face totally lights up the second she sees them, and she shouts out to the group. She's clearly happy to be back around familiar faces, telling them it's been way too long and asking if they've been doing all right. The maid's eyes suddenly well up with tears as she looks at Diana, catching her completely off guard. Before she can even react, the maid screams out and tackles her into a massive hug, leaving Diana totally frozen as the girl cries about how relieved she is to see Diana hasn't changed a bit. The other maids look just as wrecked, admitting that even thinking about the day she never came home is still enough to make their hearts stop from the sheer fear of losing her for good. Diana reaches out and takes their hands, feeling the weight of the pain she unknowingly caused. She looks down and quietly apologizes, realizing she never even got the chance to say goodbye to the people who cared about her most. The maids agree that things were a total disaster back then, but they quickly pivot and start getting her ready for dinner, while gossiping about how the head butler interrogated Jurel the second he showed his face. Turns out the entire staff was ready to riot once they found out the truth about what the prince and Jurel had done. The maid explains that the entire staff actually teamed up to force Jurel into the villa, and Diana is completely floored, realizing her brother has been stuck there ever since the day she was exiled. The maid huffs with pride, saying it's only natural since he needs to think about how he treated her, but Diana just stands there in a daze, unable to believe the servants moved that fast to shut him out. The maids keep crowding her and complaining about how mean it was for her to keep them in the dark, so Diana looks down and apologizes, admitting she wasn't even sure if her plan was going to work out. She realizes the maids probably have their own ideas about why she acted the way she did. They likely think she caught wind of some secret gossip, specifically the part about her brother being bought out by the prince's side to betray her. Diana thinks back to the Villainess she was supposed to be in the game, the one who spent all her time making the heroine's life a living nightmare. Diana looks away, thinking her brother didn't actually deserve to be locked away like that, but it's crazy because even though her dad and brother were always doting on her, she still got exiled, so she just relied on what she knew from her past life and her current family's money to make a move. She admits she was just trying to handle everything on her own since she didn't know how to explain it, but then the maid drops a total bombshell that catches Diana completely off guard. The maid explains that right after she sent Lord Jurel away to the villa, something else happened. A messenger from the Lazulite family showed up at the house carrying a special letter, and the maid says that's exactly how the entire staff knew their lady was actually safe and sound. She confirms the letter was sent by Master Alec himself, which makes Diana realize what's going on, and the maid starts blushing and fangirling, asking Diana since when she's been in a secret relationship with Alexis. Diana is totally frozen as the maid asks if she only kept her cool during the prince's public meltdown because she had another guy waiting in the wings, and the maid doesn't stop there, mentioning that a second letter arrived right after the first one from someone named Viscount Cole, leaving Diana looking super awkward while she tries to explain that she's never even heard that name in her life. But the maid is already off in her own world, calling this mystery guy a hero for checking on her lady, and mentioning how she's had her suspicions about Lord Alexis for a pretty long time now. She thinks it's so romantic that this Cole guy stayed quiet until Diana was actually in a pinch, and now she's leaning in close, calling Diana a total lady killer and demanding to know what's really going on. The other maids join in, getting right in Diana's face and loudly asking which of the two handsome guys is her actual favorite, which sends Diana into a full-on panic as she yells at the top of her lungs that they've got the whole thing wrong, that it's nighttime at the Ames family villa, a big brick house sitting quiet in the dark. Jurel is standing by the window staring out at the stars when someone calls his name, and it turns out to be Raymond, the head butler, who's showing up with some tea for him. Jurel looks pretty surprised to see him and wonders why he'd come all the way to the villa. Raymond just asks if something happened back at the main estate, while he keeps it quiet and focuses on pouring the tea into a cup for the young lord. Jurel waits as the tea is served, but the vibe feels a bit heavy between them until Raymond looks up and tells him that the master of the house, Jurel's father, has officially made it back home, which sends Jurel into a total state of shock. He jumps out of his chair asking if his dad wasn't due back tomorrow, but Raymond says some things changed and explains he was simply told the head of the family returned much earlier than they expected. Jurel clicks his tongue as the news hits him, and he mutters that he finally understands exactly why things are playing out this way while he reaches for his drink. Raymond stands firm and calls out to the young lord to make sure he's listening because the authority over the estate was given to the lady of the house, not to Jurel, and she tells him to really think about why his father made that call, leaving Jurel asking if they think he's just incompetent, but Raymond says he's not so sure about that. The butler doesn't hold back, pointing out that Jurel chose to help another lady instead of his own sister, so his father's judgment was actually spot on, a comment that leaves Jurel staring down at the table, quietly admitting that the old man is right that he looks completely stunned as the weight of his own betrayal finally starts to hit. Raymond points out that Diana was actually ahead of everyone from the start. Jurel just sits there taking it in and looks completely lost when the butler tells him that since his sister is safe, he needs to get his act together. The butler tells him to start eating right and makes it clear that he owes his sister a real apology in person, leaving Jurel leaning back in his chair, totally drained, just whispering his sister's name as the weight of it all hits him. The scene shifts over to the massive royal palace where the atmosphere is completely different and Diana stands by the window, looking out and realizing the big day she's been waiting for is finally here. She knows the king is back in the capital today, which means the quiet time is over because the official word is about to drop regarding the people who tried to ruin her life, and now the prince and all his followers are finally going to face the music for what they did to her. Diana looks on with a sharp focus, ready for the fallout of everything she set in motion. Diana isn't really sure how things are going to wrap up in the end, but a voice suddenly calls her name, pulling her back to reality as the maids show up to let her know it's time to move and she needs to get ready. Diana just tells them she's got it, so she keeps a sharp focus, knowing that regardless of what happens, this whole situation is getting finished today. The carriage starts moving down the road, heading straight for the palace, while Diana sits inside looking out the window until someone calls out her nickname. She's stuck in her own head, just staring blankly as she hears her name again. Silvio asks if she's doing okay since she's clearly spacing out. She just snaps out of it and says sorry, but he tells her not to worry about it because anyone would be feeling the pressure with what's coming next, that he finishes by telling her she doesn't need to stress over anything. Silvio makes it clear that the princes are only getting what they deserve, and he adds that the same goes for Jurel. Diana looks completely stunned hearing him say that like she's totally lost. Silvio just looks down with this heavy, sad expression on his face, so Diana looks away and quietly says she understands how it is. Silvio tells her he's ready to accept whatever happens, that they'll repent for everything together because as a family, that's really the only thing they can do at this point. Diana agrees that he's right now that things have reached this level, there's no other way out of it. She looks out the window, wondering if she can even protect them anymore, even though she knows people will call her soft. Even so, she just can't stop her mind from spinning through all the what-ifs. Diana starts spiraling into deep regret, thinking about what might have happened if she had only handled things differently. She looks at Jurel and wishes she had taken the time to listen to his troubles first, because she can't help but feel like things really could have turned out a lot better for their family than this. She thinks back to the original game plot back to her old life, and remembers that in that story, there is always a specific scene where the guy who's supposed to be the love interest tells the heroine all his secrets. By opening up to Sophia like that, it's like a weight is lifted off their shoulders and their hearts feel lighter, so they naturally find themselves falling for her and that innocent act she's always putting on for them. Looking at him now, Diana tries to recall Jurel's route in the game. His big worries were always about his brothers, her, and his own future. He was always living in the shadow of his older brother, Silvio, who was pretty much the perfect heir in every way, and the game made it so Jurel only learned to be himself after meeting the heroine, and that's a problem for Diana right now. Diana keeps thinking back, realizing that even though she had a pretty rough personality back then, it didn't help that Jurel was constantly feeling like he didn't measure up to the two people above him, leaving him stuck in the shadow of Diana, who was seen as this brilliant person and the prince's perfect fiancée. She thinks if she had just listened to his problems, he might not have ended up so loyal to the heroine, but that's just how she's feeling now. Back then, it probably would have been impossible to change anything anyway. The scene shifts back to how things used to be, with Jurel always surrounded by the heroine and the other guys, so everyone looks happy and gets along perfectly, just like the game was supposed to go. Diana admits she was actually terrified watching everything happen exactly like the game's script without her even trying. She was scared that if she tried to fight back or resist the plot, she'd end up facing a way worse punishment, and that fear is the real reason she just stayed quiet and accepted everything that happened to her. Diana looks back at how she acted at school, purposely keeping everyone away. She lived like an outsider, and she couldn't even talk to her dad or Silvio about it. Seeing Jurel's confused face makes it clear how much she kept hidden, since her only real plan was to get the engagement canceled. She was focused on that alone, but she clenches her fist, thinking about how she just didn't want anyone else to get caught up in her mess. She tells herself that as long as things go like the game's story, she can find a way to make it work, yet there's still this nagging fear that if the trial goes sideways or something unexpected happens, things will get bad. She reaches out, realizing that if the script changes, she'll be totally helpless to stop it. At the time, she was just trying to survive and protect herself. Once the exile actually happened, it felt like she was finally free from the game's plot for good. She felt liberated from that world's destiny. But in that same moment, Jurel made a choice for himself, one that changed everything between them. Jurel stood there by the heroine's side, not acting like a brother at all, but as someone who fully bought into her act. Diana remembers how he stood against her during that judgment day. She felt completely resigned to it, thinking it was just the typical way a reverse harem game is supposed to end. Back then, she just told herself that none of it could be helped. Yet now she's starting to wonder. She thinks about guys like Alec and Bart, specifically how even though they were part of the group meant to take her down, they actually suspected the whole thing was a setup. She reaches out mentally, realizing that maybe things could have gone differently for Jurel too, just like it did for the others. She looks at him, admitting to herself that she really wanted her brother to believe in her. But the reality was harsh and didn't turn out like that, leaving Diana with the painful truth that she even wanted Prince Gerald to believe she was innocent. Jurel calls out to her using her nickname, D, catching her completely off guard and leaving Diana looking at him and thinking about how he's still her brother, even after everything that happened. So she realizes that since he chose to side with the prince, she can't exactly ask for him to be the only one let off the hook, but it doesn't change the fact that he's still her precious brother, and it hurts, especially since they've been close since they were little kids. No matter how the game version of Diana was supposed to act, leading to this deep sadness of not being believed by her own flesh and blood, that it's a lot to handle, and she feels so much frustration toward the heroine for all the lies and the prince for forcing that judgment on her. Suddenly, The carriage comes to a stop and Silvio tells her that they've finally arrived at their destination. But as he calls out her name again to get her focus, Diana looks up with a sharp, determined expression while Silvio tells her straight up that she can't look away from what's coming next. Juro looks pretty intense while he says that the people involved did things that just can't be brushed off as some student prank. And Diana looks completely pale and shocked by the weight of it all. But Silvio reaches out and tells her it's her duty to see this through to the very end. She places her hand in his and gives a firm yes. She's ready to face whatever comes next. So Silvio explains the plan, starting with how the king is handling the fallout of all this drama. Turns out that His Majesty is about to make a huge public announcement to everyone about her engagement to the prince being officially over. He warns her that things might get unpredictable. So for now, she just needs to stay put and watch the situation from this small window, leaving the two of them standing there in silence as they prepare for the big moment to start. Diana peeks out and is blown away by the massive crowd gathered below. It's way bigger than she expected. She spots a bunch of high-ranking officials she hasn't seen since the king first took the throne, and the whole room is buzzing with noble gossip. She just stares down at them, bracing herself for the announcement that's about to change everything. Someone calls out to Zafiro as he stands there looking ready for whatever is coming. Bart and Jurel are right behind him, and Sophia looks up at Zafiro with a confused expression, asking if he's actually looking for someone in the massive crowd up in their hiding spot. Silvio watches the scene unfold and tells Diana that things are finally about to start. So the king steps up and addresses the entire room, his voice cutting through the noise as he calls for everyone's attention. He demands silence from the nobles, standing tall and looking every bit like the ruler he is. The room goes dead quiet, and then he looks straight at Zafiro, telling him he's noticed how his son has taken quite a few liberties while he was away. He doesn't stop there, asking Zafiro if he has any excuse for all the drama and commotion he's been causing lately. Zafiro doesn't look scared at all. He just lets out a small smirk like he's got everything under control, which leads to him telling the king he has no idea what he's even talking about, acting like he's completely innocent, that he pulls Sophia close and says he only did what was natural for the sake of the one he loves, making a big show of it. The king takes a deep breath and lets it out. He tells everyone he's going to explain exactly how things are going to go from here on out, that he doesn't hold back at all, announcing right then and there that the engagement between Zafiro and Diana is officially over. The whole room starts buzzing with people whispering to each other. They can't believe it's actually annulled and start wondering if Diana was the one who messed up. The king keeps going, saying that with the way things turned out, it would have been impossible to keep the engagement going anyway, and he thinks to himself that the moment has finally arrived. Zafiro looks down at Sophia with this relieved look on his face. He's thinking that he's finally free from everything, but up in the shadows, Silvio is so mad he's practically shaking. Diana has to step in and tell her brother to stay calm before he gives them away. The king isn't done yet. He turns his focus straight back to Zafiro, addressing him by his full title as the first prince. He drops the real hammer, telling Zafiro that since he's the one who broke the engagement, he's officially disinherited Zafiro and Sophia both look like they've seen a ghost. Moving right along, the king announces that the right to the throne is being taken away and passed down to the second prince. Zafiro just stands there completely frozen. He looks totally broken, like he just realized everything he worked for is gone. The king continues his announcement, mentioning that Jadeite is already set to start at the academy, while the crowd starts panicking about Zafiro being kicked out of the line of succession, and everyone realizes the stakes. The king says if the younger prince graduates without any issues, the title is officially his. Zafiro is losing his mind, screaming out to understand why his father is being so harsh that he demands to know why just ending things with Diana would cost him his entire future as the ruler, and he tries to play the victim, shouting to the whole room that he was only following his heart because he found real love with Sophia. He gets even more aggressive, pointing the finger at Diana and claiming she's the villain who spent all her time harassing and being cruel to Sophia, so he declares she's totally unfit to ever be the queen. Just as he's finishing his rant, someone steps forward and asks to have a word about those accusations. Alec shows up looking dead serious, standing right in front of the prince to address him directly. Diana watches from her hiding spot, surprised to see Alec and Bart suddenly making their move in the middle of all this drama. But Zafiro is the one who's really shook. He stares at his two former allies, asking what they're even doing there. Meanwhile, Sophia is actually blushing and looking relieved, thinking her side just got the backup they needed to win this fight. Sophia speaks up, telling Alec and Bart that she was really worried since the two of them had gone missing, and she keeps a bright, happy smile on her face while explaining that it's not really a reverse harem if everyone isn't there. Diana hears this and just freezes that she's completely blindsided by what just came out of the girl's mouth. She can't even process it, repeating the phrase reverse harem in her head and questioning if she actually heard that right, because looking at Sophia's knowing smile, a terrifying thought starts to cross Diana's mind, making her wonder if she's actually alone in this, since she was supposed to be the only person who knew this world was a game. She stares at Sophia, realizing that if this girl is using terms like that, she has to be a reincarnated player too. Alec looks over at Sophia with total disgust, asking under his breath what the hell is wrong with her, especially since she's acting so weird and casual while standing right in front of the king. But Diana is too busy spiraling to notice Alec's reaction. She's stuck on the fact that Sophia clearly knows Alec and Bart are capture targets. Diana stands there in total shock, realizing that Sophia actually staged a bullying incident that never even happened, just so she could deliberately frame Diana and make her look like the villain in front of everyone, which leads to a heavy realization Sophia isn't just a character. She's a reincarnated soul exactly like Diana is. Diana starts sweating as she thinks back, remembering how she always felt Sophia's personality was way too twisted for a typical game heroine. But now it all clicks. The person living inside that body belongs to someone else entirely, and everything finally makes sense. The way Sophia acted and the things she said weren't just random. It was all calculated because no matter how hard Diana tried to avoid the main story, she was being pulled back in. She clenches her fist, realizing there was an actual person behind the scenes, a will that was actively seeking to pass judgment on her and ruin her life. All those game-like developments that Diana spent years being terrified of didn't just happen by chance. It turns out Sophia was the one causing all of it since she knew the game's script and wanted to force the ending her way. Diana stands there with this look of total clarity, finally realizing that the game's force wasn't actually controlling her. The thing she was so terrified of for years never actually existed, and it was all just a big misunderstanding on her part. But then she notices something else going on with the group. Her eyes widen as she hears Prince Gerald sounding pretty stressed. He says he understands why Alec is standing there, but he wants to know why his own attendant Bart is there too. Sophia just turns around with this innocent look and asks if it's really that weird. Then she starts dropping a truth bomb. She asks Bart if he's actually the son of Marquis Adolphe from the Kingdom of Imberg, and the look on Alec and Bart's faces says it all. They're both completely stunned that she knows his real identity, while the rest of the people in the room start losing it. Everyone's whispering about Imberg being that massive empire across the sea. They can't wrap their heads around why a high-ranking noble from a superpower would be working as a servant for their prince. Bart doesn't try to hide it, but he looks Sophia right in the eye and asks how she even knows that, since he definitely never told her. Sophia starts acting all flustered, trying to explain that Bart's secret identity is just part of the setting, but she's clearly struggling to find the right words to cover her tracks. Then she just flips the script and gives this big bright smile, claiming she actually knew the truth about him from the very start. Alec looks incredibly tense as she goes on, saying how relieved she is because she had been looking everywhere for the two of them. But then her face goes totally blank and creepy, showing that there's something way darker behind that innocent act. She clasps her hands together like she's about to cry, telling everyone she was panicking because she really thought she wouldn't be able to win them over, especially since she considers both Bart and Alec to be such difficult people to deal with. Gerald just stands there looking completely stressed out. Alec isn't buying any of it, though. He tells Sophia straight up that he has no clue what she's talking about and suggests they just move on. He gives a quick confirmation, looking like he's ready to get down to business and stop the nonsense. Moving forward, Alec addresses the whole group, saying they first need to look at the actual reasons the prince gave for dumping Diana, especially the claims that Diana was bullying Sophia. He looks totally ready to tear those accusations apart. Alec explains that the harassment Sophia dealt with was just a few noble kids acting on their own. Diana never actually gave anyone instructions to do that. He then shifts the focus to the claims about verbal abuse, which catches Diana completely off guard as she listens to him defend her. Alec clarifies that those harsh words were really just Diana correcting Sophia's behavior, that it was a standard reprimand for a noble, not abuse. while he brings up the most serious charge of all, the claim that Diana pushed Sophia down a flight of stairs. Turns out Diana has a perfect alibi because she was busy with her royal education that day. She was actually at the castle and wasn't even on the academy grounds when it supposedly happened. Alec tells the prince that every single one of these accusations is just a lie Sophia made up, leaving the prince looking completely shook. And he adds that the prince could have figured this out easily if he'd actually bothered to investigate instead of just taking her word for it. One of the aides speaks up, confirming that Sophia was the one who personally told the prince that Diana was the culprit. But Alec shuts it all down by saying they have witnesses for every single thing he's mentioned. Sophia just watches it all go down with a cold look. Prince Gerald finally turns on Sophia, demanding to know what the meaning of all this is. He's looking totally panicked, yelling about how she was always crying to him and claiming Diana was bullying her. Alec looks down at them with total disgust, calling the whole thing pathetic while the prince and Sophia just stand there. Silvio can't believe they were all so easily tricked by one girl, looking over at a silent Jewel as he says it. Sophia starts to lose it, screaming that it's impossible while Diana just watches her without saying a word. The prince snaps and shouts Alec's name, but Alec just keeps his cool. Gerald points a finger right at him, accusing Alec of being the one actually trying to frame Sophia, that he's completely enraged now, shouting that Alec was always on Diana's side anyway. He goes even further, yelling that he's sure Alec just bribed the witness to make Sophia look bad. Alec doesn't even flinch, just coldly reminding the prince that he'd actually warned him about this plenty of times. Alec doesn't hold back, telling the prince he was a fool for just believing everything Sophia said without checking the facts. He admits he actually feels for her because of the way other nobles treated her, but that doesn't change what she did. Alec points out she turned those bad experiences into a way to frame an innocent person, while Sophia just stands there looking totally unhinged as she demands to know why Alec is suddenly taking Diana's side. She starts screaming about how the heroine is supposed to become the queen as soon as this party ends, looking completely desperate as she asks why she's the only one getting blamed for everything. Sophia just snaps and starts yelling at the top of her lungs, losing all her composure, ranting that because the Villainess didn't do her job, she had no choice but to start all these events herself. She's completely lost it now, eyes wide and face flushed as she screams that everything is Diana's fault. The prince stares at her in total horror, barely able to ask what she's even talking about anymore. Sophia is fully losing it now, screaming that if Diana had just bullied her the right way, she could have focused on winning everyone over. She keeps ranting about how the lack of bullying is the only reason she couldn't get their affection levels high enough. With a totally crazed look on her face, she yells at the top of her lungs that everything is officially Diana's fault, but then she suddenly shifts, wearing this creepy smile while the crowd watches her in total silence. She turns to Saphiro and tells him that protecting Diana is completely pointless now, asking him if he agrees. Saphiro just stands there looking worried while she laughs, telling him that no matter how hard he tries to fix things, there's absolutely no way he'll ever be allowed back into noble society after what's happened. The king cuts through the noise, looking her dead in the eye and asking if she admits to everything Alexis said. Sophia tries to defend herself, telling His Majesty that she had no choice and was just trying to follow the game's scenario. She keeps rambling to the confused crowd, explaining that in the reverse harem ending, Diana was always destined to be exiled. The crowd looks on nervously as the king clenches his fist, telling Sophia that talking to her is just a total waste of time, that he looks Saphiro right in the face, and tells him he's clearly lost his mind forever thinking this girl could be his queen. Saphiro is breaking out in a cold sweat while the king continues, bringing up Diana's noble status and the decree to have her exiled. But then a voice calls for someone to come in. A white heel with a rose detail steps into the room. Diana walks in looking absolutely stunning, and the whole crowd starts shouting her name while Saphiro and Sophia just stand there frozen. She keeps her cool and gives everyone a polite greeting. Saphiro is shaking so hard he can barely even whisper her name. Diana stands tall and introduces herself to the room while Sophia looks like she's about to have a total meltdown. Sophia loses it and screams at the top of her lungs, demanding to know why Diana is even showing her face there. Diana doesn't even flinch, she just stares back with these icy quiet eyes that say everything. She calmly brings up how she was supposed to be stripped of her rank and sent off to a brothel, and Sophia can't believe she's actually saying it out loud. Diana looks right at them and says the whole point was to make sure she could never show her face in public again, basically. They just wanted her out of the way so she wouldn't be an obstacle when Sophia became the queen. The plan was actually pretty dark, aiming to strip Diana of all her pride and her dignity as a woman, leaving her in a spot where even if her punishment got cancelled and she came back to the nobility, she'd be so ruined by the scandal that she could never actually step back into society ever again. That way Sophia would never have to be compared to her. But Diana just thinks the whole thing was incredibly short-sighted. She gives them a sharp, icy look while Zafiro stands there looking nervous. Zafiro is sweating bullets while Sophia starts getting a nasty look on her face. She tells Diana that no matter how cool she acts now, she can never go back to being the person she used to be. Sophia starts laughing like she's lost it, saying a woman who's been in a brothel isn't even worth a second look. Diana stares ahead, her eyes wide, as she prepares to make her move, that a hand goes up to grab the room's attention and someone calls out to the king. The king looks completely rattled as he admits he's been keeping a secret from everyone there. But Diana cuts through the tension and asks if she can have permission to speak. The king hesitates, looking pretty stressed, but Bart steps in with a smile, telling the king it's fine because he already knows what Diana is going to say. Alec backs him up, saying there shouldn't be any issue, since Diana clearly has a lot she wants to get off her chest. So the king gives her the green light. Diana says thanks, while Sophia just stands there looking like she's about to freak out. Diana starts to explain the truth about her time at that place, and with a huge, happy smile, she drops the biggest reveal yet. She's actually the owner of the shop. The king loses it and yells in pure shock, while Zafiro and Sophia look totally stunned. Meanwhile, Bart and Alec just stand back and enjoy the show. The crowd is losing it, and one guest asks what Diana is talking about. She just smiles and explains she actually bought the place before she was ever exiled, which means she's been living a life just as comfortable as her old one. Sophia is standing there looking completely rattled, just repeating the words bought out to herself. Diana looks around the room and mentions she sees some of her shop's regular customers right there in the crowd. The nobles start sweating as she says she'll give them all a proper greeting. The mood gets serious as Diana looks at the prince. She tells him she already knew he found her annoying and was planning something, and she was fully aware that she'd be framed and kicked out on the night of the party. She was ready for everything, and she looks him right in the eye. The prince is just frozen in shock as she addresses him. Looking more composed than she's ever been, she explains that he didn't even need to go through the trouble of framing her, that if he had just asked to break the engagement like a normal person, she would have agreed to it on the spot. The prince loses his cool and yells at her, asking if she wasn't obsessed with becoming the queen this entire time, but Diana doesn't even flinch. She just looks down and calmly tells him that wasn't the case at all. Diana keeps going and reveals that she actually tried to turn down the engagement multiple times before it was even set in stone. She explains that a noble can't just say no to the royal family, but Sophia completely loses her cool, screaming about why Diana is going off script. Sophia's face goes pale as a crazy thought hits her, and she starts wondering if there's any chance that Diana is actually a reincarnated person just like her. Diana just puts on a confused face and asks what she's even talking about, acting like the word reincarnation doesn't mean anything to her. Sophia starts spiraling, clutching her head and yelling that she's the heroine and this world belongs to her. Guards grab Sophia, and she starts screaming for them to let her go. Diana watches her get dragged off, thinking she feels a little bad now that she sees how unstable the girl is. But then she turns her focus back to the prince. She calls out to him and gives him a small smile, saying they really should have had this conversation a long time ago. The prince stands there looking completely broken, barely able to whisper Diana's name as he realizes how much he messed up. Diana doesn't hold back, looking the prince right in the eye and telling him she never had any real feelings for him. He just stands there looking completely lost as she reminds him that she already made her stance clear, staying perfectly calm while repeating that she never once bullied that girl, just like she always said. Moving on, it's been a few days since that massive showdown took place. Things in the royal capital are finally starting to settle down, but at the shop, Sedona calls everyone together holding up a document and breaking the news that the operating license for the business has been revoked starting today. The girls in the room are hit with total shock, immediately starting to whisper among themselves. One of them asks Sedona what she's talking about, and if something happened to Diana looking for answers, but Sedona just closes her eyes, saying that certain people played the fool and finally got punished. She begins to explain the situation, bringing up exactly what went down with the first prince and his followers. The shop staff look pretty shaken up, saying they've definitely heard the rumors. Apparently the whole town has been talking about nothing else lately. Sedona looks down and explains the harsh reality: the shop is getting closed down because it's the place that helped exile an innocent noble lady, which has led to a direct order coming down from the royal family itself. She holds up the official notice, telling the group that the business is basically being erased from existence, that it's a total shutdown, and Sedona doesn't sugarcoat it, telling them the owner said everyone is officially fired. The girls start losing it, unable to believe this is actually happening. They start worrying about their futures, wondering where else they could possibly work since the hygiene in other towns is honestly terrifying to them. One of the girls stares off, just asking why Diana would leave them like this, but Sedona tells everyone they need to stay calm so she can finish. She needs them to listen because she's going to explain the whole plan in order, starting with what's going on with Diana. She tells the group that Diana is heading out to the countryside for a full year, that she's just completely drained and needs to recover from everything. Sedona looks at the building and explains that renovations are about to start, so this place isn't going to be the same shop anymore. Diana just smiles at the news and says that if that's how it's going to be, she wants to move on to the next point and talk about getting everyone new jobs. She looks back at the building and admits that the whole situation actually caught her off guard at first, but the staff realizes the plan. They repeat back that since the shop getting torn down is basically unavoidable, they're going to need people who know how to treat customers right for a brand new business venture. Diana stands there for a second, looking like she just remembered something from a long time ago. Outside, the workers are already busy moving barrels and heavy sacks around the site. Bart notices her spacing out and asks what's on her mind. Diana just shakes it off and tells him she was just stuck in her own head for a minute. Diana mentions she's just talking about the renovation plan he and the owner worked out, but Silvio tells her to stop with the formal marquee talk. He looks pretty flustered and admits he just got the title, so he isn't used to hearing people call him that yet. Diana just smiles and apologizes, calling him Lord Silvio instead as a compromise. She goes on to say the owner really never stops surprising her with everything she pulls off, and everyone is still wrapping their heads around the fact that they're actually turning the old building into an inn. Sedona steps up and explains the new setup, saying that while Diana is away, she'll be taking over as the proxy owner, with Silvio acting as the guardian for this whole new business venture. It turns out all the new staff members they hired are beautiful commoner women. Apparently, they got lucky finding a group of girls who had just lost their previous jobs right when they needed them. Silvio just sighs, telling Sedona that she and Diana have some serious nerve jumping into this right after the scandal. Silvio looks totally wiped out by the situation, but Diana just giggles and says everything worked out because of the owner's personality. Apparently, her whole plan is to turn this place into a high-end, modern Oriental style inn. Diana mentions that the traditional yukata outfits were a huge surprise to her, but she thinks that's exactly why the whole concept feels so fresh and interesting. She loves the idea of the staff wearing those clothes while they take care of the guests, though Silvio can't help but wonder where on earth she even learned about stuff like that he watches her, thinking how he expected her to be miserable after the engagement broke off, but she looks way happier now. Diana agrees with how things are going, so Silvio asks where the owner and the prince's former aide ended up. Turns out the guy has been stripped of his noble status and sentenced to hard labor. Silvio goes quiet for a second, just taking in the weight of everything that's changed. Over at the detached palace of Yule Castle, the atmosphere is heavy. For someone who spent his entire life training to be the next king, being stuck here is a total nightmare, as we see hands clenched tight, showing just how much pressure and stress the guy is under. Gerald looks completely drained and defeated as he quietly calls out to his father, who finally shows up. The king tells him it's been a long time since they spoke, and asks if he's finally managed to cool his head and think clearly. Gerald sits there looking miserable and asks about his mother, but the king just keeps his stern focus on the conversation. And then, the king admits he's deeply disappointed by everything Gerald has done recently, explaining that for now, he is putting all his heart and soul into educating the second prince to take over the throne instead. The king calls him a total fool for letting a woman seduce him and basically destroying his own future, and it's clear that he's done. He asks Gerald if he actually thought his parents were okay with his behavior at the academy. Gerald looks absolutely horrified, realizing that the king was watching the whole time. He explains that the academy is basically a small version of the kingdom, where everyone is judging his every move. The king stays on his son's case, explaining that a person's real character shows in how they conduct themselves. Gerald looks completely stunned as his father tells him he was totally clueless about being tested as a royal the entire time. Looking down, Gerald finally admits to himself that he definitely knew he was getting way too carried away, but he justifies it by thinking it was basically his last shot at living a free life before everything changed. He was just so caught up in the idea of losing his freedom the second he became the crown prince, and he couldn't stop thinking about the looming future where he'd have to marry Diana and take over as king right after graduation. Looking back at the memories of holding her, he starts to wonder when exactly things began to shift with Sophia, questioning what the real reason was for falling so deeply in love in the first place. He used to feel like he'd do anything for her sake, spending all his time dreaming about her and constantly picturing what the kingdom would look like if she was the one standing by his side as queen. Gerald gets real with himself, realizing all that pressure just made him grow to loathe everyone around him. That he thinks back to Diana, his fiancée who always kept her cool no matter what was happening. And then there was Alexis, the aide who basically acted like Sophia didn't even exist. A voice cuts through, saying it would be one thing if he had only ruined his own life, but he had to go and drag a bunch of other promising guys down with him. A hand grips a cane tight while the speaker asks Gerald if he even realizes what he's done, specifically calling him out for framing Alexis, leaving Gerald standing there looking completely stunned and speechless. The truth finally comes out that everyone knew he had been jealous of Alexis for a long time, so Alexis snaps at him, asking if that petty jealousy was the reason he tried to drive him into the worst kind of despair. He demands to know if Gerald actually got a kick out of seeing him lose it when the girl he loved was sent off to a brothel. The king looks down at his son, admitting he really hoped Gerald would have used all that frustration as a way to actually grow as a person. But he just sighs and calls out Sephiroth's name, that he brings up how Gerald was betrothed to Diana at such a young age, asking why he'd ever treat her so badly, and mentions how the queen used to be so upset about his behavior, especially because the king remembers Gerald being genuinely happy about the engagement when they were kids. Gerald grits his teeth, cutting him off to say that woman has always been completely malicious. His eyes go wide and bloodshot as he yells about how he finally realized the truth about her, but he starts ranting about how she'd always get the top grades in his worst subjects just to mess with him, that he's totally losing it now, claiming she only studied hard to humiliate him in front of everyone. The king doesn't even say anything, just staring at the mess his son has become.